Chapter 661, Ravenclaw's Sacrifice. "You think this is a good idea, Rowena?" Helga Hufflepuff asked, her expression solemn as she gazed at her best friend. "You plan to use your own life force as a shackle to control this evil creature. Have you considered the consequences?" "Rowena, the dark magic within this creature will inevitably affect you. I don't doubt your ability to resist its corruption, but it will undoubtedly cost you dearly. We decided long ago to sacrifice our lives to prevent that bleak future, didn't we, Helga?" Rowena Ravenclaw replied with a calm smile. "We must confine this creature to ensure it never leaves the island after we're gone, consuming life's emotions and growing its numbers unchecked. Since we cannot destroy them yet, they must be controlled by wizards until the final moment arrives. I intend to use my life force as a medium to forge a contract with this Dementor, making this malevolent tribe controllable. Even as time passes, as long as this contract exists, they must obey the wizard's commands. I can pass this contract to the future headmasters of Hogwarts. Of course, I hope it never comes to that. Future generations of wizards might not be content with merely limiting their instinct to expand. They might seek to harness the power of these creatures. Regardless of their intentions, using this power is inherently evil." Atticus Blaine's eyes trembled slightly. It seemed that Rowena Ravenclaw ultimately did not entrust the contract to the headmasters of Hogwarts, but to the successor of the Royal Society of Wizards, the Ministry of Magic. This is indeed an often overlooked issue. For years, Dementors have guarded wizard prisons for the Ministry of Magic. When people think of those prisons, the terrifying Dementors are the first thing that comes to mind. Yet, no one questions why these purely evil creatures obey the wizarding government. So is the contract still held by the Ministry of Magic, granting its possessor the right to command the Dementors? For Atticus, restraining the Dementors isn't difficult, and unless they gather in large numbers, elite wizards can handle them with ease. However, this doesn't mean Dementors are not to be feared. They are a nightmare for ordinary wizards, as few can master the complex magic of the Patronus charm. Is this contract currently in the hands of Cornelius Fudge? This thought crossed Atticus's mind, but he quickly dismissed it. Allowing an individual to control this contract is too dangerous. More likely, the contract is kept in the Department of Mysteries, belonging to the wizarding political organization rather than in an individual. The Minister of Magic might not even be aware of it, with the secret of the contract's origin and power held by a silent guardian within the Department of Mysteries. Using one's life force to bind the uncontrollable Dementors so they obey orders? Harry Potter stared in awe at Rowena Ravenclaw, a witch renowned for her beauty, wisdom, and power, her green eyes shimmering with determination. Harry didn't fully grasp the complexity of the magic involved, but he understood one thing clearly. To achieve this, Miss Ravenclaw would pay a heavy price. Such profound self-sacrifice was deeply moving. Yet, Miss Ravenclaw's words did little to ease Helga Hufflepuff's concerns, and her eyes grew heavier with each passing moment. "I understand, Rowena, but your child—" "I wouldn't have done it before she was born," Lady Ravenclaw replied calmly. "You know very well that's not what I mean, Rowena," Hufflepuff said, gently brushing a hand through Ravenclaw's hair with a touch of sadness. "This child won't have her father by her side. Do you still want her to lose her mother, too? Her father will be there to watch her grow and teach her magic, even if they don't know each other," Miss Ravenclaw said with a poignant smile. "Even for us, there will come a day when we pass away, Helga. I believe my child can take responsibility for her own life." Harry's fists clenched at the thought. Take responsibility for your own life. His parents had died fighting against Voldemort. Did they also hold this belief before they died? But against whom? Deep confusion stirred in Hermione's heart. It couldn't have been the Royal Wizarding Association, could it? Dementors. The earlier conversation made Hermione realize that Miss Ravenclaw and Miss Hufflepuff were doing their utmost to destroy them, but they were just Dementors. Was Ravenclaw, one of the 4 founders who made Hogwarts great, truly so self-sacrificing? The future is a river with countless forks, impossible to fully glimpse. I hope it eventually flows towards the brightest path from where I peek. Helga's burgundy eyes were filled with pity. "We are all working on it," said Lady Ravenclaw, her majestic Goshawk Patronus perched on her shoulder, swallowing the Dementor once more. Atticus Blaine thought this memory would end here, but after Ms. Ravenclaw waved away the Patronus, she turned to Ms. Hufflepuff. "Did you find out anything about the door I brought back from that island, Helga? Could it be the Death Door in the final Starry Sky chamber in the underground ruins of Azkaban?" Atticus immediately recalled it. It was a mysterious and malevolent magical item, with an ancient aura lingering around it. It was hard to fathom why it was created. Miss Hufflepuff did not answer Ravenclaw's question directly, but led her to an oil painting of an open valley on the wall. She fiddled with the originally beautiful painting behind an ear of rice carved on the yellow border. A vortex suddenly appeared, and Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw stepped in one after the other. "Follow quickly," Atticus urged the three young wizards, swiftly following them. "Are we going back?" Ron asked anxiously, looking at the oil painting. If possible, he hoped to find another way back to the familiar castle. The scene he had witnessed in the corridor earlier had left him with an indescribable mental impact. "I don't think it's time yet," Atticus said succinctly before disappearing into the painting. The three young wizards and two elves hesitated briefly before the vortex subsided, then entered the frame one by one. Harry looked around, bewildered. They hadn't returned to the cold and terrifying corridor, but found themselves in another room. It was clean and tidy, much like Miss Hufflepuff's office, with a bright floor-to-ceiling window. Outside, the endless Forbidden Forest stretched out. Unlike their era, there was no boundary between the Forbidden Forest and the grounds. A simple wooden house stood there. This was less a secret chamber and more a private retreat where Miss Hufflepuff enjoyed her solitude. On the shelves near the window, there were many flowers and plants. These weren't the magical plants Professor Sprout cultivated in the greenhouse, but edible plants and fruits. There was even an exquisite stove where Miss Hufflepuff could experiment with her whimsical new dishes. Magic-related items were scattered about. Upon entering the secret room, several crystal balls adorned the wall on the left. Most of these excellent crystal balls were filled with a hazy mist at their centers, and one or two figures were enveloped in the dazzling starry sky. "Miss Hufflepuff is—" Hermione gazed at the crystal balls, a realization dawning on her face as she exclaimed in shock. "Just like Professor Trelawney." "There are probably some differences," Professor Blaine remarked, his eyes fixed on the Door of Death directly across the room. The door was bound by intricate ancient magic patterns carved into the ground. "I'm not entirely sure of Professor Trelawney's true abilities, but Miss Hufflepuff clearly has the power to capture real images from the realm of illusory fate." "Has anything ever emerged from this door, Helga?" Ms. Ravenclaw asked, momentarily forgetting the magical inscriptions on the ground. She quickly realized that the seal was Helga's doing, meant to prevent any abnormal activity from the door. "Fortunately, nothing concerning has happened so far." Miss Hufflepuff replied with grace as she approached the archway. Her fingertips brushed against the curtains, which swayed eerily despite the absence of wind. Turning back, she smiled at Ms. Ravenclaw and added, "But I went in." End of this chapter. Chapter 662, Door to the Starry Sky. If Dementors were something Harry and his friends were familiar with, the ancient archway before them was entirely baffling. Harry and Ron instinctively moved closer to Hermione, whispering, "Do you know what this is, Hermione? Is it mentioned in any of your books?" Hermione bit her lip, shaking her head in frustration. The knowledge she once prided herself on seemed utterly useless now. She couldn't grasp what Helga Hufflepuff and Rowena Ravenclaw were discussing, nor could she decipher the significance of the simple stone gate before them. One thing was clear to Harry and his friends: the stone arch was not to be trifled with. The pitch-black void beneath it emanated an indescribable danger, sending shivers down their spines despite the centuries that separated them from its origins. Hermione, ever eager for knowledge, glanced hopefully at Professor Atticus Blaine. His calm demeanor suggested he knew something about the archway's secrets. She was certain he was aware of her gaze, yet he offered no response. Frustrated, Hermione muttered under her breath and resolved to remember every detail for her own investigation later. Miss Hufflepuff claimed she had entered the world beyond the door. Ravenclaw seemed unsurprised, but Atticus Blaine's eyes narrowed slightly. This door, exuding an aura of death, was incomplete. It lacked crucial coordinates. Without them, entering the world beyond could lead to exile in a void filled with chaotic spatial forces, or perhaps even the cold expanse of outer space. Helga Hufflepuff was undoubtedly a formidable witch, but escaping unscathed from such environments would be a challenge even for her. "What did you see, Helga?" Ravenclaw inquired. Surprisingly, Hufflepuff didn't answer immediately. Instead, she gestured toward the crystal balls on the left wall, prompting Ravenclaw to follow her gaze. Understanding dawned on her. "Most of the time, I perish in perilous space storms. Occasionally, I find myself in a completely unfamiliar, lifeless starry sky devoid of magic." Miss Hufflepuff's response left everyone, including Atticus, astonished. Did this mean Lady Hufflepuff possessed the ability to rise from the dead? Such a notion was unheard of in history, and even in the magical world, it seemed implausible. However, Atticus quickly set aside his shock, his gaze on the stone arch growing more contemplative. There was a path back in the starry sky. He recalled the revelation Merlin had left in the secret chamber of the Centaur Holy Land. This revelation had been troubling him recently, and now with Miss Hufflepuff's admission, he connected the two. The door was a gateway to the stars. The temple at the center of Avalon Island was where Merlin had moved from Azkaban to imprison the twin staffs. The stone pillars blocking the entrance to Azkaban's underground secret realm were also placed there by Merlin, indicating he had explored Helbo's lair and entered several secret chambers beneath the magma. Perhaps it was this exploration that prompted Merlin to leave some contingency plans. Merlin had seen this mysterious stone arch, but had not taken the coordinates from it. Godric intercepted the aura of the sealed stone pillar we discovered on the island in the North Sea, hoping to find what you saw, the rumored Avalon Island that the young man from Salazar Academy will visit. Salazar himself is investigating the remaining coordinates. Avalon Island? The three wizards' rigid bodies trembled in unison. Whether, in both the Muggle and Wizarding worlds, the legends of King Arthur are equally renowned. Atticus Blaine's expression darkened as he pondered the young man from Salazar College. Was this about him? And about the one he has found? Rowena raised her delicate hand, revealing a black stone with a crack running through its center. During this period, I studied the coordinates of the object he discovered. I suspect this is the so-called Deathly Hallows. Deathly Hallows? Atticus's eyebrows furrowed in disbelief. Could such things truly exist? The Elder Wand, the Invisibility Cloak, and the Resurrection Stone, these three magical items from the tales of Beetle the Bard, are revered by wizards as the Deathly Hallows. The legend of the Hallows is particularly popular in Northern Europe, with both young witches and dark wizards seeking these items to become the Master of Death. Could these three items actually serve as coordinates to open the door to death? The alchemy stone that can trace the imprint of dissipated souls in the world, Miss Hufflepuff remarked, her gaze fixed on the black stone in Rowena's palm. It's hard to imagine how it was made. I have a theory about this, Rowena said, stepping closer to the stone arch. The curtains on the door seemed to sense the presence of an object of the same origin, fluttering more vigorously as if eager to reunite with their complete self. This stone, sharing the same origin as the stone gate, possesses incredible abilities. I've been contemplating that perhaps they do not belong to our world. Which world do you think they come from, Rowena? Miss Hufflepuff inquired. This is the most plausible hypothesis. In ancient times, that world was not as distant from us as it is today. Someone might have had the ability to enter that world and brought something back, forging it into doors that could traverse the two worlds. This ensured that even after that world became distant, he could still wield its magic. If one day he grew weary of our declining world, he could use that world as a springboard to a different starry sky, Ravenclaw explained, her voice cold and analytical. She held the black stone, which had captivated everyone's attention, and brushed aside the curtain, revealing three irregular indentations on the arched door. As the stone in Ravenclaw's hand drew nearer, its shape became unstable, the hard surface flowing like water until it transformed completely into a drop of black liquid. With a soft splash, the liquid filled one of the dents and quickly solidified. The dark space beneath the stone arch began to tremble visibly. The restless magic power stirred a strong wind throughout the room. At this moment, the mysterious magical texts on the ground were activated, lighting up one after another, confining the magic storm within a defined range. Helga Hufflepuff and Rowena Ravenclaw finally demonstrated their legendary strength. Each was enveloped in a cool blue light and a soft yellow glow, standing firm amidst the magical storm like rocks in a raging sea. Their silent presence even distorted the surrounding space. Where the black stone was embedded, intricate lines spread outward, resembling magical words, but more akin to natural lines, representing rules. The three Harrys and the two elves were so astonished by the spectacle that they momentarily forgot it was merely an illusion. They watched, captivated by the unfolding events. Atticus Blaine retreated into the corner, his eyes wide with fear as he gazed at the stone door. Suddenly, the trembling black curtain beneath the stone arch steadied, yet the movement intensified, growing more violent. The cold, dark curtain unleashed a powerful force, drawing in the surrounding magic at an alarming rate. The glowing magical symbols on the ground were drained of their energy one by one, fading into darkness. Amidst this transformation, a bright path began to emerge faintly behind the black curtain. Atticus stared at the path of light piercing through the darkness, his eyes betraying a deep sense of longing. "Control it, Rowena. I'll go in and have a look," Miss Hufflepuff declared solemnly. End of this chapter. Chapter 663, The Road Beyond the Peak. Is Miss Hufflepuff really going to step through this turbulent door? Not only did Harry and his friends think it was a reckless move, but even Atticus Blaine found it excessively risky. However, as a close friend, Ms. Ravenclaw did not stop her. Instead, she nodded slightly and said in a cold voice, "Pay attention to the time, Helga. I can't restrain this power for too long. You must finish before it affects Hogwarts." As soon as she finished speaking, Ms. Ravenclaw suddenly unleashed a powerful surge of energy. Her ice-blue eyes shone as brightly as stars, and the blue light surrounding her became fiercely intense. It expanded rapidly, enveloping the entire room in a pure sky-blue hue. Atticus's fingertips brushed over the star-like dots scattered in the space, hazy through the blue veil. The isolation of thousands of years had prevented him from seeing many real things, but he could still discern that these star-like light spots were magic nodes. These nodes were embedded in the void, connected by a mysterious force that seemed to redefine space and magic. Although the stone arch continued to emit a powerful suction, the storm within the room had subsided. The scene before him was not merely Ravenclaw unleashing powerful magic to imprison the void. It was more like a realm governed by independent world rules and the will of its creator. Atticus could only speculate about this. Was this the path beyond the peak, the path of a saint? No, Horn had once said that saints needed to place their spiritual imprint on the magical world. Atticus understood this to mean that a wizard had to sign a contract with the magical world using their soul as the medium. Through this contract, one could draw upon magical power regardless of spatial distance. However, as the magical world drifted away, future generations could no longer connect to it with their spiritual power. He had originally thought that the four giants of Hogwarts could still perceive the magical world with their peak strength, but from the conversations he had just experienced, it seemed that this was not the case. The four founders of Hogwarts were not saints in the true sense, but they were not weaker than saints either, for they had forged their own paths. By understanding magic and creating a world of their own, they had transcended the world and dominated an entire era. Seek another way, Atticus thought, gazing eagerly at the stars wandering in the void and resonating with Ms. Ravenclaw. An unprecedented surge of excitement coursed through his heart. The fog that had obscured the path to greater strength finally dissipated, and Atticus saw the road beyond the peak. Four great founders. Atticus, usually calm, could no longer suppress his excitement. His remaining sense prevented him from laughing out loud, but this was indeed a path worth pursuing. Of course, this did not mean that Atticus's strength would immediately explode, but with a clear direction, everything that followed would become clearer. If he could truly reach the level of the four founders, at least in his era, no one would pose a threat to him, not even Voldemort with his Horcruxes. "What's wrong with Professor Blaine?" Atticus trembled slightly, a smile of relief appearing at the corner of his mouth. This was the smile of someone whose path to magic had become clear. However, his unusual demeanor was quickly noticed by the three young students beside the wall. The events unfolding before them were enough to frighten them, and Professor Blaine's strangeness only added to their fear. Ron asked, trembling, "Was he hit by Ravenclaw's magic?" "Don't be ridiculous, Ron," Hermione retorted instinctively. "What we saw were mere illusions. It's impossible for Miss Ravenclaw's magic to affect Professor Blaine after 1,000 years. Despite her words, Hermione's eyes betrayed her deep concern. Taking a few steadying breaths, she left Harry's side, and with trembling hands approached Professor Atticus Blaine. She summoned the courage, to gently tug on his robe. "Yes?" she inquired softly. Miss Hufflepuff's original intention in leaving this memory might have been to impart more knowledge about the Dementors, the significance of the door, and the Deathly Hallows. However, Atticus felt that Miss Ravenclaw's sudden surge of power was an unintentional reminder, the most significant takeaway from this journey. Immersed in his thoughts, Atticus suddenly realized someone was tugging at him. He turned to see the anxious eyes of Harry, Ron, and Hermione fixed on him. "Oh, don't worry," Atticus reassured them with a smile. "I just wanted to understand something. Now, let's continue." Since Hermione had first encountered Professor Blaine in the school hospital, she had never seen him lose his composure like this. Things were definitely more complicated than Professor Blaine let on. Hermione pursed her lips, feeling a twinge of dissatisfaction, but more so, a sense of inadequacy. This unexpected adventure had shaken her confidence. Outside of her close circle of friends, Hermione rarely flaunted her knowledge, though she took pride in it, knowing it was the fruit of her hard work. She had believed she was on the cusp of mastering magic, but this experience revealed how far she still had to go. For a moment, Hermione's thoughts drifted back to the night of Dom's birth, when she and Angelina had a brief discussion about love with Professor Blaine. He had remarked that instead of seeking a partner who might resonate with his soul, he preferred to devote his time to advancing his magical abilities. Those words had struck her like a bolt of lightning, leaving her emotionally unsettled for some time. Now, this experience deepened the insights from that night. She realized she was not as knowledgeable about magic as Harry and Ron believed. She needed to focus more on her studies, just like Professor Blaine, who was hailed as the most powerful wizard of their time due to his relentless pursuit of magical knowledge. This is... Hermione, lost in thought, suddenly heard Professor Blaine's whisper, snapping her back to the present. The illusion before her was invaluable, and she couldn't afford to miss any of it. As her eyes refocused, she understood what had caught Professor Blaine's attention. It was Lady Helga Hufflepuff. Under the light cast by Lady Ravenclaw, Lady Hufflepuff's magic was equally extraordinary. Moments ago, Miss Hufflepuff had expressed her desire to enter the enigmatic stone arch. Visitors, including Atticus, 1,000 years later, assumed she would simply walk through it. However, that was not the case. Miss Hufflepuff's burgundy eyes suddenly filled with a silvery light, far more intense than when she had attempted to prophesy for Miss Ravenclaw's child. In comparison, even the sunlight filtering into the room seemed dim. The silver light blazed brightly, and finally, silver threads began to emanate from Miss Hufflepuff's eyes. These threads were so intricate that even Atticus couldn't discern their nature as they spiraled and danced in the air, gradually taking shape. The scene was set, and at last, a dozen silver phantoms, as elusive as ghosts and bearing the same silhouette as Miss Helga Hufflepuff, materialized before everyone. "I'll be back soon," they intoned in unison, their voices ethereal and haunting. With that, the spectral figures glided into the shadows beneath the stone archway. End of this chapter. Chapter 664, Across the Star Sea. More than a dozen mysterious silver phantoms, conjured by Miss Hufflepuff, surged into the stone archway one after another. They ascended the faintly glowing path of shimmering light beyond the door, vanishing swiftly like shooting stars. Miss Ravenclaw maintained the hazy blue starry sky that filled the secret chamber, and the space where this starry sky connected with the stone door was distorted. This distortion suggested that the consuming force emanating from the stone door was still active, albeit restrained by Ms. Ravenclaw. If left unchecked, it threatened to engulf all of Hogwarts. Time ticked by, and an oppressive silence settled over the secret room. It was evident that Miss Ravenclaw was under immense pressure. Beads of sweat were visible on her temples and forehead, and her cheeks had turned from snow white to a pallid hue. Although Atticus Blaine knew he could not alter events that transpired thousands of years ago, he couldn't help but feel anxious. Every passing second felt like an eternity. All eyes were fixed on the door, eagerly awaiting the news that Miss Hufflepuff's peculiar magic might bring back. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed through the void, reminiscent of firecrackers, snapping more than a dozen times in quick succession. Miss Hufflepuff, standing firm until that moment, appeared to suffer a sudden, severe injury. Her face turned ashen in an instant, and she staggered backward, barely able to remain upright. Miss Ravenclaw opened her eyes slightly, and the blue mist surrounding them formed a chair behind Miss Hufflepuff, catching her as she faltered. Immediately afterward, Miss Ravenclaw extended her hand toward the stone arch. The coordinate embedded in the upper sill of the door detached with a swift motion, reverting to its original dark black hue in midair, a thumb-sized black stone with a crack running through its center. The stone arch, now devoid of its coordinates, fell silent. The black curtains clinging to the door ceased their frantic fluttering and resumed a gentle sway. Helga, Miss Ravenclaw's domain dissipated. She appeared utterly exhausted, her wizard robe's collar drenched with sweat, yet she still seemed in better condition than Hufflepuff. Ravenclaw quickly approached her best friend, concern etched on her face. Hufflepuff's eyes were tightly shut, her expression grim, and the corners of her eyes twitched slightly. It was hard to fathom what ordeal could cause such a legendary witch to endure so much pain. Our guess was correct, Rowena. Hufflepuff's voice trembled slightly as she spoke, still unable to shake off the pain. The path behind the door can lead to that world, and I can feel its presence. You need to rest, Helga, Miss Ravenclaw insisted, her tone leaving no room for argument. However, Miss Hufflepuff stopped Ravenclaw, urgency in her voice. The path was incomplete. I was expelled from the void and nearly perished in the star sea where magic was depleted. Miss Hufflepuff continued with difficulty. To reach that world, we need complete coordinates and immense magic power. Constructing a path across the star sea requires magic far beyond our imagination. Before that, this door must be closed. It needs to be severed from the coordinates. Otherwise, the depleted starry sky behind the incompletely opened door will consume all the magic in our world, and it has the power to destroy magic. Destruction magic? Even Hermione, who was bewildered, understood the grave implications of Helga Hufflepuff's final words. When magic power ceases to exist, magic itself will vanish. All wizards in the world would face an unimaginable crisis. The world is destined to become mundane, with magical creatures and plants losing their enchantment as magic fades away, eventually transforming into ordinary beings. Magic will be buried in history. Atticus Blaine's eyes twitched with a fierce intensity, fear unmistakably etched in his gaze as he stared at the door. For many wizards devoted to the magical path, this foretold the erasure of the their very essence. I've never been close to that world, Rowena. Rowena noticed Helga's hand trembling slightly on her arm. Through that tremor, she could sense the fear gripping Helga's heart. No one understood their power better than the four of them, and Rowena knew all too well how terrifying something must be to instill fear in Helga. I sense they are still alive, and the war rages on. If the darkness isn't vanquished in the sea of stars, it will inevitably return to our world. Everything will wither, and we must aid the one from Salazar Academy. Only he can contain it. He belongs to that world. Helga Hufflepuff was exhausted. Her hand slid towards Lady Ravenclaw's, touching the black stone. Until that person appears, this coordinate must be preserved. If we don't find others, Rowena Ravenclaw said seriously, Salazar appreciates the small power this coordinate holds. He will gladly keep it and pass it on. You need to rest, Helga. You've expended too much energy. Helga slowly closed her eyes, leaning against Rowena. Her breathing gradually steadied. Simultaneously, the secret chamber they occupied began to shake violently. The world around them became a blur in the tremors. Earthquake? Harry's voice was filled with disbelief. Could there really be an earthquake at Hogwarts? No, Miss Hufflepuff has lost consciousness, and her memory has reached its end, Atticus said in a deep voice. As his words fell, the sound of shattering glass echoed in the void. Instantly, the sunlit room plunged into darkness, and the space stretched unnaturally. The chaos caused Harry, Hermione, Ron, and the elves Dobby and Dom to lose their balance and fall. The bone-chilling cold enveloped Atticus, making him shiver momentarily. Realizing where he was, he swung his wand, casting a light ball as large as a quaffle into the air. Mr. Blaine, Rugia, who had been pacing anxiously in front of the blue stone wall, was stunned for a few seconds upon seeing the group that had suddenly appeared. Then he rushed towards Dom, who was dizzy from the fall, and embraced him. This unexpected turn of events made Atticus raise an eyebrow. He suppressed his emotions, observing the scene quietly. "Are you okay, Dobby?" The three young wizards helped each other to their feet, taking in their surroundings. Harry pulled up Dobby, who was at his feet, and asked with concern. "Dobby is fine, Harry Potter. Dobby is just a bit dizzy," Dobby replied, holding his head. Hermione, meanwhile, noticed Dom being hugged by Rugia. Her expression froze momentarily, and then... "Oh!" Hermione covered her mouth, tears welling in her brown eyes. She couldn't believe what she was witnessing. Rugia, who had once abandoned Dom, was now embracing him. Harry and Ron, drawn by Hermione's exclamation, also looked on in surprise. Sensing their gaze, Rugia jumped back in panic, leaving Dom looking confused. Rugia seemed bewildered by his own actions, his expression a mix of confusion and fear. Facing Atticus Blaine, he trembled and muttered, "Professor Blaine and Rega are rude." After a moment of silent contemplation, Atticus shook his head, turned away from Rega, and fixed his gaze on the blue wall at the end of the corridor. End of this chapter. Chapter 665, The End. Atticus Blaine left Harry, Ron, Hermione, and the three house elves behind as he wandered beneath the ancient blue stone wall. Even after thousands of years, this wall exuded a chilling breeze, casting an eerie and somber atmosphere over the corridor. The temperature was kept at an unnaturally low level, a testament to the powerful magic that had been cast upon it long ago. It was clear who had left this enchantment, though the specifics were lost to time. While it was said that love could awaken a yearning for freedom and self-awareness in the soul of a house elf, the reality was far more complex. If it were that simple, the compassionate Helga Hufflepuff would have done more than just save the house elf named Kiki. She would not have ignored the other elves residing in Hogwarts, nor would she have left this corridor as a testament to their tradition. Atticus's fingertips brushed against the wall, occasionally tapping it lightly. His penetrating gaze seemed to pierce through the stone, as if he could see the secrets hidden behind it. Harry watched Professor Blaine with awe, noting how he explored without the use of a wand or spells, relying solely on his senses. Harry had long understood that the grand displays of magic were often the hallmark of novices, not experts. "Behind this wall," Hermione began, her voice cautious due to the oppressive atmosphere and Professor Blaine's earlier warnings. She glanced at Atticus, who appeared deep in thought, standing before the wall in contemplation. "Do you think the office we saw earlier belonged to Miss Hufflepuff?" "Yes, it's still behind this wall," Atticus confirmed. "Are you going to open it again?" Ron asked eagerly. The adventure had been thrilling yet safe, and the prospect of revealing the office of Hufflepuff's founder was tantalizing. "Can you do it?" Ron pressed further. Under the expectant gazes of the group, Professor Blaine considered for a moment before shaking his head. "It's not difficult to open this wall, Ron, but I don't want to do it unless it's necessary," he explained. "Opening it would destroy the magic within the wall. More importantly, Miss Hufflepuff has already shared what she deemed most valuable. Out of respect for her and the legacy of Hogwarts, I believe it's best left undisturbed." Suddenly, Atticus turned to Harry and the others, a thought crossing his mind. "Rugia mentioned that when you touched this wall, you were drawn to it. Can you describe what happened in more detail?" Harry, Ron, and Hermione exchanged glances, unsure of what Professor Blaine sought. Nevertheless, Harry spoke up. "It was me, Professor." He paused, taking a deep breath, his green eyes reflecting the fluorescent light with a hint of anxiety. We reached the end of the corridor and found this wall. I sensed something unusual, like there was something hidden behind it, so I approached to investigate. Harry swallowed, recalling the moment vividly. When I touched the wall, it suddenly felt soft, and I sensed a hand inside pulling me in. Half of Harry's body was embedded in the wall, Hermione added, her voice tinged with lingering fear. I grabbed his hand quickly, and Ron rushed to hold onto my robe, but it was no use. A powerful force was pulling all three of us in. Dom and Dobby tried to save us, but then they were also controlled, and I asked Regia to find you before entering the wall, Atticus Blaine said, nodding thoughtfully. The sensation was familiar, reminiscent of when he had touched the wall himself, a powerful force that had imprisoned and dragged him in. So you're saying... Atticus narrowed his eyes, focusing on Harry. Aside from Harry, none of you actually touched the wall? After a few seconds of silence, Harry, under the intense gaze of Professor Blaine, nodded uneasily. Atticus glanced at the gold watch on Harry's wrist, a gift from him, and with a few suspicions forming in his mind, he nodded slowly. "Let's go," Atticus said, exhaling a sigh of relief. He addressed the three Harrys who had been involved. "The adventure is over. There's no reason for us to stay here and endure the cold. Let's head out first. I have something to discuss with you." The sense of security brought by Professor Blaine's presence was indescribable. The three Harrys followed him, their eyes fixed on his thin but upright back. As they passed the stone walls lined with elf heads bearing terrifying expressions, fear was absent from their hearts. Instead, they felt a lack of understanding of this behavior and a sense of pity for the house elves. When Atticus led the group out of the cold stove late at night, the previously quiet kitchen suddenly became lively again. The house elves seemed to possess special abilities. Not only did the elves left to tend the stove awaken, but those sleeping on the floor and next to the stove also sensed the presence of wizards nearby. They awoke in a panic, rushing to Atticus, bowing humbly, and asking if he required any service. In such circumstances, Atticus couldn't explain anything to them. He waved the elves away and led the group out of the kitchen. As they returned to the warm corridor outside, adorned with paintings of delicious food, Harry and the others felt as if they had entered another world. Though they had only been in the kitchen for 2 hours, the strange experience had drained their energy and minds. Atticus noticed the fatigue in their faces. After ensuring no students were around, he spoke plainly. "Let me be straightforward. I think you all realize that what you witnessed in Miss Hufflepuff's office is of great importance." Ron opened his mouth, then shrank back a bit, guiltily. To be honest, the experience had been extraordinary, ranking among the most incredible events they had encountered in their 3.5 years at Hogwarts. They had witnessed an amazing piece of history, but its importance seemed distant. After all, it was 1,000 years ago, wasn't it? In Ron's opinion, whatever crisis the Big Four had faced should have been resolved by now. Whether it was the Dementors, the ominous door, the coordinates, or the sacred artifacts, none seemed as thrilling as the revelation that Ms. Rowena Ravenclaw and Godric Gryffindor had a child. Whether it's the three of you or you, Atticus glanced at the three Harrys and then seriously at the three elves. "I don't want you to mention anything you saw during this experience to anyone." "Oh," Ron said, a bit disappointed. "No one at all?" Harry and the others expected Professor Blaine to sternly reiterate his request for confidentiality. However, they didn't fully grasp the significance of his request. From Harry's perspective, if people knew that the reason evil Dementors obeyed the Ministry of Magic was due to Ms. Rowena Ravenclaw, Hogwarts would surely gain fame. But to their surprise, after a moment of contemplation, Professor Blaine added, "If one day, Principal Dumbledore..." Professor Dumbledore had taken the initiative to inquire, but was he truly unaware? Professor Blaine had explicitly forbidden them from discussing the matter with anyone else unless he had first informed Professor Dumbledore. Hermione's eyes flickered with a myriad of thoughts swirling in her mind. "Besides, I trust you haven't forgotten the instructions I gave you in Miss Hufflepuff's office, correct?" Professor Blaine asked solemnly. Harry was momentarily confused, but then the memory resurfaced. Seeing the three of them nodding in agreement, Atticus Blaine nodded with satisfaction. He glanced at the three house elves, hesitated, and ultimately decided against taking any action against them. These elves, bound to Hogwarts, were obliged to follow his orders, and some of Dumbledore's warnings from their return journey with the centaur Elder Horn still resonated with him. "Then hurry back," Atticus said, rubbing his temples, looking slightly weary. The night's revelations had been overwhelming, and he needed time to rest and reflect. Hermione blinked in surprise, hesitating to speak, while Harry and Ron, who knew her well, signaled her with urgent glances. "What is it?" Atticus asked curiously. "Punishment," Hermione said, taking a deep breath, her face flushed with embarrassment. "We violated school rules, Professor." "Oh, that matter," Atticus said, patting his forehead and casting a glance at the downcast Harry and Ron with a smile. After a moment's thought, he continued, "Then you'll clean the classroom. The three of you will be responsible for maintaining the cleanliness of the physical education classroom after each class until the Christmas vacation. No magic allowed." "Does it really have to be this way?" Harry asked sadly, watching Professor Blaine as he departed. He turned to Hermione, his expression forlorn. End of this chapter. Chapter 666, Clues and Dance. Ever since Atticus Blaine explored the secret realm beneath the island of Azkaban, guided by the spirits of Gryffindor and Ravenclaw, he had anticipated that he would one day join the ranks of wizards searching for the Deathly Hallows. The information left by the four legendary founders, spanning thousands of years, served as crucial guidance. They would not have undertaken such endeavors without purpose. The Resurrection Stone, the Elder Wand, and the Invisibility Cloak. Those who possess these three sacred artifacts are said to become masters of death, wielding powers beyond the ordinary. What was once historical fact has been transformed into myth, embellished by generations. Atticus believed that the three sacred artifacts were indeed powerful magical tools, but the notion of conquering death itself by possessing them was likely not a tale spun by Helbo. It is plausible that Merlin, the first to set foot on Azkaban and discover the Stone Arch, left the coordinates to the door as a way to preserve the story through time. Why did Merlin choose to conceal these coordinates? The purpose seems clear, to guide future seekers. In the Centaur Holy Land, Atticus received a revelation left by Merlin. There is your way home in the starry sky. Later, at Hogwarts, he stumbled upon a method to reach the starry sky. Was this mere coincidence or a preordained path? There was no point in dwelling on it. The most pressing task for Atticus was to find the artifacts. Yet, this was no simple feat, whether it involved the three sacred artifacts or the Door of Death. The clues Atticus currently possessed suggested that the Resurrection Stone and the mysterious Door of Death were once controlled by the four founders thousands of years ago. Since they were guiding him, they wouldn't have made the path insurmountable. But where could they be? The nature of the Door of Death was elusive. Such a perilous object was unlikely to be hidden at Hogwarts or buried underground by the founders, unless they intended for their tombs to be discovered and opened millennia later. The golden sunlight, reflected by the year's first snow, draped a shimmering veil over the ancient Hogwarts castle. Outside, the fields echoed with the laughter of young wizards, reveling in a weekend snowball fight. Inside, the castle's corridors carried the joyful sounds, yet the library remained a sanctuary of silence. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the ordinary reading area, while the restricted section, filled with eerie whispers, remained shrouded in gloom. Atticus leaned against a bookshelf in the restricted section, his eyes vacant as he delved into deep thought. Where could that door be? He felt as though a thin barrier separated him from the truth, needing only a spark of inspiration to break through. Yet, amidst the chaos of his thoughts, that crucial inspiration eluded him. Ravenclaw had hinted that the Resurrection Stone might be in the hands of Slytherin's descendants. Atticus's brow furrowed slightly. Could it be akin to Slytherin's locket? Regardless, he finally had some leads on these two items. However, the whereabouts of the Elder Wand and the Invisibility Cloak remained a mystery. Wrong time. Atticus Blaine said, his voice warm and understanding. He adjusted the stack of manuscripts in his arms, careful not to let the fragile pages slip. The symbol on the first page, a triangle enclosing a circle with a vertical line bisecting both, seemed to pulse with a mysterious energy, drawing his thoughts back to the legends of the Deathly Hallows. Atticus had stumbled upon these manuscripts quite by accident while perusing the restricted section of the library. The papers, detailing the origins and bloody history of the Hallows, were not where they should have been. They belonged in Professor Binns's office, yet somehow they had found their way into the library's forbidden corridors. Atticus had been intrigued, his curiosity piqued by the strange symbol and the tales it promised to tell. As he made his way out of the library, he was greeted by the sight of Victor Krum and Hermione Granger engaged in conversation. Krum, the Durmstrang champion, stood with a posture of respect, his eyes reflecting a mix of admiration and nervousness. Hermione, on the other hand, seemed startled by Atticus's sudden appearance, her gaze flickering to the manuscripts he held. "Good afternoon, Mr. Krum," Atticus greeted, maintaining his friendly demeanor. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." Krum hesitated, glancing at Hermione before responding. "No, Professor Blaine, you're not interrupting. I was just asking Granger if she would accompany me to the Yule Ball." Atticus chuckled softly, understanding the situation. "Ah, the Yule Ball. A wonderful tradition. I wish you both the best of luck." Hermione's cheeks flushed a deeper shade of red, and she nodded shyly. Atticus noticed her eyes lingering on the manuscripts, particularly the peculiar T and the enigmatic pattern on the first page. He gave her a reassuring smile, hoping to ease her apparent discomfort. "Well, I should be on my way," Atticus said, excusing himself. "I have a meeting with Professor Binns to discuss these old papers. Enjoy the rest of your day." With a final nod to the students, Atticus continued down the corridor, his mind already returning to the mysteries of the Deathly Hallows. The manuscripts in his arms felt heavier with the weight of history and secrets yet to be uncovered. As he walked, he couldn't help but wonder what new insights they might reveal about the legendary artifacts and the Peverell brothers who first possessed them. "I'll leave now." "But, Professor Blaine." Hermione clutched the book in her arms even tighter. As she had explained to Harry and Ron, Professor Blaine had only forbidden them from speaking nonsense, not from investigating. Despite this, Hermione couldn't shake her unease, whether it was about a secret investigation or finding a partner for the Christmas ball. "I plan to go home for Christmas. Victor just told me that the school will organize a dance at Christmas." "No one has informed you yet?" Atticus Blaine looked at Hermione in surprise. "I thought someone would have told you a long time ago." Hermione shook her head honestly. "All right." Atticus slapped his forehead. "This is a tradition of the Triwizard Tournament, Miss Granger. During the Christmas period, the school hosting the competition holds a dance, inviting young wizards from the 3 schools to participate, fostering mutual exchanges and camaraderie. According to tradition, the dance begins with the warriors and their partners. Well, you are a Hogwarts warrior, Miss Granger, so I suggest you and Mr. Cedric not be absent." End of this chapter. Chapter 667, Krum's Proposal. Atticus Blaine patiently explained to Hermione, who still seemed a bit bewildered. At the start of this school year, the school issued a notice to students in the 4th grade and above, instructing you to bring formal attire for the upcoming dance. Hermione suddenly recalled the incident when she and Harry had gone to Hogsmeade to meet Sirius. Harry had accidentally bumped into a Beauxbatons champion, Fleur, who was seriously injured at the time. Professor Blaine had also purchased a dress and asked her and Harry to deliver it. She had wondered why Professor Blaine would think of giving a dress as a gift. It turned out it was to prepare for the Christmas ball. "But the school never issued an official notice," Hermione said, her voice tinged with frustration. "We didn't know, Professor Blaine." "You know now, don't you?" Atticus replied with a slight smile, glancing at Krum, who appeared somewhat anxious. He added, "Remember what I said, Miss Granger. The ball will be opened by the 4 champions and their partners. We do not require other young wizards to participate, but the champions must find their own partners. This is a tradition of the Triwizard Tournament. I believe that for outstanding young people like you, this is not a problem." Seeing Hermione purse her lips in silence, Atticus smiled gently. "Well then, that's settled. I'm sorry to interrupt your conversation. I have other matters to attend to. You two can continue your chat, but..." Atticus glanced at the book in Hermione's arms, prompting her to clutch it tightly. Studying is important, but balancing work and rest is even more crucial. Don't waste your youth in the library. With weather like this, I suggest you take a walk outside. He's such a good man, Crumb thought wistfully as he watched Professor Blaine walk away. However, the memory of the pattern on the first page of the manuscripts in Professor Blaine's arms made him frown again. Professor Blaine hadn't reprimanded her for conducting a private investigation, which relieved Hermione. Yet, thinking about the prom and the need for a partner made her blush from her cheeks to the tips of her ears. Her boot-clad toes pressed firmly against the ground, as if trying to dig through the floor. It was so embarrassing. The library was nearly empty today. Hermione, who was searching for information that might contain clues, planned to spend the entire day in this peaceful reading environment. Unexpectedly, Crumb walked in. Perhaps the joy of the snow outside had kept the usual crowd of starstruck followers away. Upon seeing her, Crumb paused momentarily, then happily approached and invited her for a chat. Hermione assumed Crumb wanted to discuss the golden egg with her. Due to the first task, she was determined not to accept help from others, and was prepared to refuse if Crumb broached the topic. Unexpectedly, Crumb, with a hint of shyness, invited her to be his partner for the Yule Ball. Before she could process this, Professor Blaine had appeared. Now she understood the situation. This was beyond her expectations. Hermione couldn't believe Crumb approached her simply because he couldn't find anyone else to accompany him to the ball. The boy in front of her was incredibly popular. Even without her two friends who were obsessed with Quidditch, just observing Crumb's fan group, Hermione knew it. Yet, he had chosen her. Hermione felt her ears burning with embarrassment. To be fair, she had always had a good impression of Crumb. During the Quidditch, on the final night of the summer riot, Hermione found herself trapped in the top box with Harry, Sirius, and the Weasleys. When she sought assistance from the Bulgarian Quidditch team, only Victor Crumb responded to her plea. Before the first event of the competition, Crumb had also offered her some advice. But what would Harry and Ron think if they knew about this? "I don't understand," Hermione murmured softly, her cheeks flushed as she stared at her toes. "I don't understand how a wizard like Mr. Blaine could do this." Crumb's reply made Hermione look up in surprise. He was still gazing in the direction Professor Atticus Blaine had left, his naturally stern face marked by solemnity and disbelief. Hermione quickly realized they were not discussing the same topic at all. "What are you talking about, Victor?" The shyness faded from Hermione's face, replaced by alertness in her bright brown eyes. "Oh, I mean," Crumb hesitated, but in the presence of a girl he admired greatly, he decided to be truthful. After ensuring no one else was around, he lowered his voice, looking both nervous and confused. "I don't understand how a powerful wizard like Mr. Atticus Blaine could idolize the Dark Lord." "Professor Blaine idolizes you-know-who?" Hermione nearly shouted, her eyebrows raised in shock. Her beautiful brown eyes, filled with disbelief and anger, fixed on Victor, demanding a clear explanation. "Oh no," Crumb quickly waved his hand. "It's not you-know-who. We don't refer to the Dark Wizard you call you-know-who as the Dark Lord in my country. What I mean is—" Crumb's tone turned somber. "It's Gellert Grindelwald." "Gellert Grindelwald?" Hermione, now highly alert, took only a second to recall everything she knew about this wizard. This was not like the wizard she, Harry, and Ron had encountered in their first year. Grindelwald's name was almost synonymous with their headmaster, Albus Dumbledore, whose legendary defeat of Grindelwald was considered one of his greatest achievements. But Professor Blaine idolizing Gellert Grindelwald? The absurdity of it seemed as shocking as if he worshipped the Dark Lord himself. "Did you notice the distinctive pattern on the first page of the parchment he was holding under his arm just now?" "What?" Crumb's tone was filled with displeasure, but Hermione's was sharper. For some reason, she found herself disliking Crumb at that moment. She knew exactly what pattern Crumb was referring to, but she pretended ignorance. "That's the pattern," Crumb gestured in the air before Hermione with his fingers, his expression dark. "If anyone else displays that symbol in front of me, I swear, Hermione, I will confront them." "What's wrong? Is there something significant about that pattern?" Despite her irritation, Hermione couldn't deny her curiosity. Grindelwald, That's Grindelwald's symbol. Crumb's cheek muscles twitched as if he were chewing something before he continued. Grindelwald killed many people, including my grandfather. Of course, he never held much power in this country. They say he feared Dumbledore, and that's true, as evidenced by his ultimate fate. But that symbol, Crumb gestured again, is Grindelwald's symbol. I recognized it immediately. Perhaps you don't know, but Grindelwald studied magic at Durmstrang. While there, he carved it into a wall. I pass by that wall every day. I will definitely not mistake it, Crumb said coldly. In school, some fools would copy this symbol onto their textbooks and clothes, trying to intimidate others and make themselves seem important. Later, those of us who lost loved ones to Grindelwald taught them a lesson. But we all know that outside the school, there are always more of these foolish individuals. They still gather under this symbol as a spiritual emblem. They long for the dark days when the wizarding world was under Grindelwald's rule and dream of causing chaos again in the future. End of this chapter. Chapter 668. Do you share the same name? Gellert Grindelwald was the first wizard in modern magical history to be widely recognized as the Dark Lord. At the height of his power, he commanded a following of nearly 100,000 wizards across Europe, sparing only the United Kingdom from his influence. Grindelwald's ambitions extended beyond the magical realm. He sought to dominate the Muggle world as well. To achieve this, he allied with extremist Muggle factions, instigating wars of conquest that plunged the world into chaos. Grindelwald's downfall was as swift as his meteoric rise. When his power reached its zenith, Albus Dumbledore confronted him alone. After a legendary duel, Dumbledore emerged victorious and returned to Hogwarts as headmaster, while Grindelwald was imprisoned in Nurmengard. His fervent followers, who attempted to rally after his defeat, were crushed by an international coalition of wizards led by the International Confederation of Wizards. This conflict was a global catastrophe, leading some to argue that Voldemort, feared by the British, paled in comparison. However, this perspective overlooks key differences. Grindelwald faced little resistance in his early rise to power, making him nearly unstoppable until Dumbledore intervened. In contrast, Dumbledore was proactive against Voldemort, warning the public and forming the Order of the Phoenix to combat him. Voldemort's forces were largely contained within Britain, preventing widespread devastation. Both Gellert Grindelwald and Voldemort were dark wizards who sought to build their empires on the suffering of others, and both ultimately failed in their pursuits. Atticus Blaine is celebrated as the most outstanding young wizard in Europe in recent years. With Dumbledore now aged, many regard Blaine as the most powerful wizard of the contemporary era. Hogwarts students take pride in having such a legendary wizard among them. Yet, Crumb's mention of Professor Blaine's supposed admiration for Grindelwald was shocking. If Harry were present, he might have reacted violently, even against a Quidditch star like Victor Krum. However, Hermione remained composed, listening intently. She felt a twinge of sympathy for Krum, whose grandfather had perished at Grindelwald's hands, a fate reminiscent of Harry's own loss. Yet, linking Professor Blaine to Grindelwald based on a mere symbol seemed reckless. Krum, lost in his animosity towards Grindelwald, noticed the change in Hermione's demeanor. Her breathing quickened and a hint of hostility flickered in her eyes. "Oh, I'm sorry," Krum quickly apologized. "Blaine is a wizard worthy of admiration. I'm not suggesting he worships Grindelwald. At least, not necessarily. That symbol might indicate he's studying Grindelwald, but such research is perilous, especially for someone of his stature." "Your thoughts?" Atticus Blaine said as he entered the room, his voice respectful yet curious. Professor Binns turned slowly, his translucent form shimmering slightly in the dim light. "Ah, Atticus," he replied in his usual monotone, "it's always a pleasure to see a former student. What brings you here today?" Atticus held up the stack of manuscripts he had been carrying. "I found these in the restricted section of the library. I thought they might be of interest to you, given your expertise in the history of magic." Professor Binns floated closer, his ghostly eyes scanning the manuscripts with a hint of interest. "Ah, yes, these are indeed quite rare. They cover a period of magical history that is often overlooked. Thank you for bringing them to me." Atticus nodded, feeling a sense of satisfaction. "I thought you might appreciate them. I've always been fascinated by the nuances of magical history, and I knew you would be the best person to discuss them with. The ghostly professor gave a slight nod, his expression as unreadable as ever. Indeed, history is a tapestry woven with many threads, some more visible than others. It's important to study all aspects, even those that are less popular or controversial. Atticus smiled, appreciating the wisdom in Professor Binns's words. I couldn't agree more. It's why I wanted to ensure these manuscripts were in the right hands. As they continued to discuss the contents of the manuscripts, Atticus couldn't help but reflect on the earlier encounter between Hermione and Krum. He felt a twinge of regret for inadvertently disrupting their conversation, but he also understood the importance of Hermione's stance. Her passion for justice and fairness was something he admired greatly. The conversation with Professor Binns eventually drew to a close, and Atticus prepared to leave. Thank you for your time, Professor. It's always enlightening to speak with you. Professor Binns gave a ghostly nod. The pleasure is mine, Atticus. Remember, history is not just about the past. It's a guide for the future. With those parting words, Atticus left the office, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. As he walked through the corridors of Hogwarts, he couldn't help but feel grateful for the opportunity to learn from such a unique and knowledgeable spirit. You, Atticus Blaine began politely. Professor Binns, who was hovering in midair, slowly turned around and fixed his gaze on Atticus, as if seeing him for the first time. Are you here to submit that failed papers, Lennet? Professor Binns asked, looking genuinely surprised. This reaction was understandable, given that it wasn't yet time to issue a new class schedule or student list. Ahem. Atticus wasn't taken aback. He clenched his fists and cleared his throat twice. Actually, I am Atticus Blaine, Professor Binns. Atticus Blaine? Professor Binns blinked, his voice dry and breathless. You share the same name as Atticus Blaine, the one who apprehended the dark witch Vicia Cleona, who was planning a terrorist attack at the 1994 Quidditch World Cup Finals in September. End of this chapter. Chapter 669, Winter. Is there a possibility, Professor Binns? Atticus Blaine said, his voice tinged with disbelief. I am the one who apprehended the Dark Witch Veti at the Quidditch World Cup Finals in August 1994. Atticus Blaine of Cleona. The deeply furrowed features of Professor Binns' ghostly visage quivered as he continued to gaze at Atticus, a look of surprise and confusion etched across his face. Atticus understood why. A certain magical history journal had chronicled his duel with Vidia that summer, immortalizing it in historical records as a significant event. This was likely the only reason Professor Binns remembered his name so distinctly. For Professor Binns, most figures in history books were long buried. All right, I'm Zlennet, Professor Binns, Atticus sighed, resigning himself to the fact that he wouldn't glean any crucial information from the professor. I'm here to inquire about the content of this paper. It's about the Deathly Hallows. Do you have any recollection of it? I told you, Beetle. Professor Binns stared blankly at the patterns on the parchment. Suddenly, he looked up at Atticus and admonished him in an irritated tone. Studying history should be grounded in credible and reliable documents, not in fanciful tales that mislead others. That can have serious consequences. Atticus paused for several seconds, realizing that Professor Binns' thoughts had drifted once more. However, there are numerous examples proving their existence, Professor. Atticus's eyebrows arched as he produced his wand. With a flick, a black stone, cracked down the middle and the size of a thumb, materialized before Professor Binns. For instance, the Resurrection Stone is clearly documented in the school's history as once belonging to the Great Slytherin. Professor Binns's attention was captured by the spinning black stone hovering before him. Silence stretched on, and Atticus almost believed the professor's thoughts had ceased entirely. Then, in an instant, Professor Binns came to life again, glaring at Atticus with irritation. Salazar did possess a gold ring with this black stone embedded in it, but I never heard him refer to it as the Resurrection Stone. Pens, there's no point in fixating on these. They won't help you achieve greatness. I hope your paper returns to reliable history, or I'll have it removed from my office, which can no longer store so many fairy tales. Atticus, who had been addressed by 3 different names in mere minutes, changed his expression. he quickly realized that Paynes was the compiler of this paper. "Did you do that, Professor Binns?" Atticus asked, disheartened. "Who did you have clear out those papers?" "I don't remember Dinetny, Bohawk, and Ranidi, Atticus." Professor Binns waved his hand dismissively, ignoring the question. He floated back to the cold fireplace, issuing stern instructions. "Your paper on the 1289 International Wizarding Conference is subpar, Atticus. If you don't resubmit it before Christmas, even if you earn an E in Owls, I won't allow you into my advanced class." After struggling for another half hour, Atticus was finally ushered out of the office by the exasperated Professor Binns. The only consolation from the entire conversation was the confirmation that Slytherin likely did pass on the Resurrection Stone, fashioning it into a ring. Moreover, Professor Binns briefly got his name right, though he still thought of him as a mere student. The Resurrection Stone is one of the three coordinates. If Slytherin and the other three founders if they share the same mindset, then the ring will hold more significance than his locket. Atticus Blaine will undoubtedly ensure that the Resurrection Stone is passed down smoothly through the ages. In other words, if Voldemort were to successfully acquire the ring left by his great ancestor, would he transform it into a Horcrux? Given Voldemort's obsession with the relics of the Big Four, this seems highly plausible. If so, where would Voldemort conceal it? Would it be entrusted to a loyal Death Eater, like a notebow? Okay, or hidden in a secret location he had visited, akin to the Ravenclaw diadem and the pendant in the seaside cave that Atticus accidentally discovered? This remains uncertain. Atticus has no insight into this matter. Perhaps Dumbledore might have some clues. "Oh, there you are, Blaine. I've been searching for you everywhere." Atticus was lost in his thoughts when he suddenly heard a gruff voice behind him. Startled, he realized he had been on his way back to the office, but had inadvertently ended up on the wrong floor, standing in a corridor on the second floor. He was momentarily stunned in front of the cave. "Professor Moody?" Atticus raised his eyebrows in surprise. He glanced at the parchment in Moody's hand and asked calmly, "What's the matter?" Two young wizards happened to pass by on the stairs. After greeting Professor Blaine and Professor Moody, they quickly hurried away. Professor Moody hesitated to speak. Atticus sensed that Moody preferred not to discuss the matter in a crowded place, so he gestured for him to follow. "Come on, Professor Moody, let's go to my office. I can offer you a cup of hot tea to warm you up and dry your soaked boots." "I'm sorry, Vitia." Deep in the Forbidden Forest, within the temple of the Centaur tribe, Horn, the Centaur elder, lay on the ground, looking apologetically at the serene and graceful Vitia Cleona, who sat on a futon. The open door allowed a breeze carrying the scent of ice and snow to waft in, gently stirring Vitia's long, smooth emerald-green hair, which accentuated her elegant and refined demeanor. However, at this moment, a hint of embarrassment flickered in the green eyes of the seemingly innocent priestess, adding a touch of humanity to her ethereal presence. After the snowfall, it becomes increasingly difficult to find food in the woods. The centaurs' stored provisions are sufficient for us to endure the harsh winter. Of course, we are willing to share, but I fear we cannot guarantee the survival of your followers living in the secret realm through the winter," Horn expressed with concern. "It's us who should apologize, Elder Horn. This is the trouble we have caused you," Vitia replied, bowing respectfully. "It was my oversight. Elder Horn, I will find a way to resolve the food issue as soon as possible." "But how do you plan to do that?" Elder Horn's voice was filled with worry, and it regarded Vitia with a kind expression, one it had never shown when interacting with Atticus and Dumbledore. "Your followers cannot venture into the woods to gather food. They must remain hidden from the eyes of wizards. You can only purchase food from the wizarding world, but that requires wizard currency. I assume you don't have much gold." "We still have some Muggle currency," Vitia said after some thought. "I can use that money to buy supplies in the Muggle world. You know, we are not seeking luxury. We just need to fill our stomachs." Horn fell silent. There are hundreds of druids living in the secret realm. If they only have some Muggle currency, it is clearly insufficient to sustain them until next spring and summer. "You are now serving the castle, Vitia. As far as I know, wizards receive payment for their services. I have already spent the money on purchasing ingredients for the potion, Vitia replied, a note of helplessness in her voice. The materials used to make the disguise potion are not cheap, Horn remarked, his eyes widening with interest. Ingredients for the potion? He repeated, feeling a surge of energy. Ah, I remember now. Many wizards venture deep into the forest to gather certain plants. If you can show us which ones are valuable to wizards, we can help collect them. Then, you can trade them among the wizards for currency or food. End of this chapter. Chapter 670. It's really hard to make money. The pristine snow transformed the forbidden forest into a fairy tale-like realm, concealing the desolation that winter brought to the woods. As Vitia, now resembling Alastor Moody, made her way back to the castle, her mind lingered on the solution proposed by Elder Horn to address their precarious situation. In a place where druids had long thrived, such issues would not have arisen. They had mastered the art of detaching from human society and living in seclusion. However, the relocation she advocated for was rushed, and to avoid detection by the two formidable wizards in the castle, it had to be executed with utmost secrecy. Consequently, many possessions, save for those tied to their heritage, were left behind. Horn's suggestion was indeed promising. Vitia even contemplated that cultivating potion ingredients could become a viable means of survival for the believers in the secret realm. Caring for flora and fauna was, after all, a druid's forte. As for selling their produce, it posed no significant challenge. They could bypass the need for licenses from the Wizarding Ministry of Magic. During their search for Atticus Blaine, Vitia had become acquainted with the underground dealings of Nocturne Alley. As long as they didn't disrupt the production and pricing standards of pure-blood wizard families, they would face only minor inconveniences. However, this endeavor required time. Druids revered the laws of nature. While they could enhance plant health, they refrained from artificially accelerating growth. Thus, a challenging period awaited them before they could reap their rewards. As Vitia emerged from the forbidden forest, the sudden brightness caused her two blue eyes, one real, one artificial, to narrow. She limped across Hagrid's vegetable garden with the aid of a cane, eventually reaching the campus grounds. It was the first snowfall of the year, and the expansive campus resembled a paradise, echoing with the laughter of young wizards. Students from 1st to 7th grade frolicked in the snow, hurling snowballs or playfully tossing each other into the drifts, their faces alight with pure joy. Vitia observed this serene scene quietly, and for a fleeting moment a genuine smile graced her lips. A gust of wind suddenly swept through the mountains, causing the ice-laden Black Lake to groan, and the field was enveloped in a thick fog of white. Yet this did not dampen the children's spirits. Their laughter only grew more exuberant. As Vitia continued toward the castle, the smile on her lips faded into bitterness. Neither she nor the children in the secret realm could afford to let down their guard and relish the simple joys of peace and tranquility. They lacked the protection of powerful figures like Albus Dumbledore and Atticus Blaine. Moreover, the sight of the little wizard's happiness was almost blinding, for she knew all too well that her actions were undermining the peaceful environment these children cherished. To the wizarding community, she was undoubtedly contemptible. Her heart was tormented, but compared to the centuries of displacement and the bloodshed of countless ancestors since the fall of Avalon Island, her struggles seemed insignificant. "No problem, Alastor. I can sign it, but it doesn't matter if I say it alone. If you don't. To go to Albus, you'll need Atticus Blaine's signature as well," Professor McGonagall said apologetically from the small study on the 2nd floor, adjacent to the corridor. "This is a regulation set by the school board, and we must abide by it. Of course, I can personally assist if you need it." "You can't break it, Minerva. It's just another damn rule," Professor Moody exclaimed, banging his cane on the floor in frustration. His scarred cheeks twisted, giving him a ferocious appearance. He picked up the application form, already signed by Professor McGonagall, from the table. "I'm going to get Blaine to sign it right away." "Oh, I hope he's as agreeable as you are." With a look of apology from Professor McGonagall, Professor Moody limped out of her office. He made his way to the 3rd floor, following the corridor past his own office, and turned a few corners to reach Blaine's office. After knocking on the door, he found no one answered. Under normal circumstances, he could wait until after dinner to discuss it with Blaine privately. However, he wanted to resolve the matter over the weekend, so Professor Moody turned back, preparing to head down to the Slytherin basement. At Hogwarts, it was well known among the staff that Atticus Blaine had a close personal relationship with Severus Snape. He visited Snape's office as frequently as he did Dumbledore's throughout the school year. Fortunately, on the second floor, he encountered Blaine, who was staring outside in a daze. Moody knew the importance of choosing his words carefully when speaking to a powerful wizard like Blaine. He calmed himself, quickly rehearsed his prepared words in his mind, and then spoke, snapping Blaine out of his thoughts. Moody had to follow Atticus Blaine back to the third floor, returning to the office he had just left. Blaine had noticed that among all his guests, Professor Moody was the one who genuinely appreciated the bitter taste of tea. This was rare, as traditional British people often preferred a more mellow and fragrant drink. However, considering Moody's isolated lifestyle, it wasn't surprising. He might often brew leaves from the forest to drink. "Blaine, I came to you because," Moody began. "Thank you very much for your trust, Professor Moody," Atticus interrupted, raising a hand to stop him from continuing. He then pointed at the bulging wine bottle in Moody's pocket and smiled slightly. "I thought you wouldn't drink the tea I made for you. It seems I've earned your trust, right?" "If Atticus Blaine isn't trustworthy, then there aren't many trustworthy wizards in the British wizarding world," Moody replied with a hoarse laugh. "Many people think I've been driven mad by my experiences as an Auror, but you and I know we must always be vigilant. Only despicable villains disregard morals." Moody's smile was fierce, but his heart was stern. He had briefly let down his guard with Elder Horn, and his concern for the church members had led him to reveal a small trick, which Blaine had immediately noticed. Faced with Moody's cryptic explanation, Atticus merely smiled faintly. He could see that Moody was eager to discuss the purpose of his visit, but he rose slowly and walked toward the bookshelf. "Since you're willing to have tea with me, Professor Moody, why don't you?" Atticus began. Atticus Blaine squatted down and opened the expanded storage space beneath the bookshelf, revealing a dense collection of gift boxes adorned with various ribbons. He picked up the top one, then closed the cabinet and turned back. The box was opened, revealing an assortment of wine-filled chocolates and biscuits. "How about some more desserts?" Atticus smiled, noticing Professor Moody's astonishment at the shapes of the cookies and chocolates. He quickly explained, "Oh, don't worry, Professor Moody. These are, perhaps early Christmas gifts from students or maybe fans. There are so many that I have to dispose of them as soon as possible." "Oh," Professor Moody managed to suppress his surprise. "That's quite charming, Blaine. I remember receiving a gift from a student last month. It was similar to yours, a vintage teapot filled with cockroaches crawling around to keep warm." "Haha, I do have a teapot warmer. Perhaps you could give it to me." "But cockroaches, oh, they might be a type of candy called cockroach clusters. Headmaster Dumbledore is quite fond of them." "Are you sure he didn't send it to you?" Atticus chuckled. The conversation flowed smoothly, not as tense or confrontational as either had anticipated. When Atticus finished the last snack in the box, Alastor discreetly breathed a sigh of relief. His hand was just about to reach for his mouth when he remembered the application form in his bag. Suddenly, there was a loud knock at the office door. Boom, boom. Moody sighed quietly and withdrew his hand from his pocket. It seemed making some extra money would have to wait. End of this chapter. Chapter 671, When It's Time to Break. Neither of the two individuals in the office were wizards whose vision could be obstructed by a mere wall. Their eyes flickered towards the door as it was knocked upon. Both Atticus Blaine and Alastor Moody exchanged subtle glances, their expressions shifting slightly. "Do you need me to step aside, Blaine?" Professor Moody asked, his voice hoarse, betraying a hint of inner anxiety. "I don't think it's necessary, Professor Moody," Atticus replied calmly. With a wave of his hand, the empty snack boxes and debris on the desk vanished. He then addressed the door in a deep voice. "Please, come in." With a click, the door opened, revealing a girl wrapped in a sky-blue cloak, her face hidden within its folds. Hiss, the weather is really cold. Phew, but it's quite warm here, she remarked, not bothering to look around the office. She closed the door behind her and removed her cloak, revealing the elegant silk school uniform of Beauxbatons that accentuated her figure. Fleur Delacour muttered as she carefully shook off the fine snowflakes from her cloak. Honestly, I didn't want to leave the carriage and come to the castle in this weather, but Gabrielle wanted to have a snowball fight with the Hogwarts students on the grounds, so I had to go out with her. She was having fun, and I was having fun, but I got bored, so I thought of you. You know what I mean? I've been waiting for you to send me an invitation, but I couldn't wait. Oh, the British are too reserved in this regard and are always secretive. Why can't it be as simple as when you defeated Vitia Cleona in the Quidditch final in the summer? Fleur inspected her cloak a few more times, finally breathing a sigh of relief as if satisfied. Perhaps you can invite me to drink a cup of the tea you often drink, Atticus. Although I don't like the taste, at least it can warm my forehead. She draped the cloak over her arms and finally looked towards the innermost part of the office. Her expression froze, and her cheeks, pale from the cold, flushed a deep red almost instantly. Silence descended, and a peculiar atmosphere enveloped the room. Fleur stood motionless, as if under a petrification spell, while Atticus maintained a neutral expression. Professor Moody, though still facing Atticus, had his magical blue eye behaving erratically, its pupil shifting from forward to inward, as if malfunctioning. Maybe it's not convenient for you right now, Blaine. Moody finally broke the awkward silence, his voice duller than before, a strange light in his eyes as he looked at Atticus. Perhaps I should come back another time. Oh no, Professor Moody, Atticus interjected, sensing that Fleur's unexpected visit might prove more troublesome than Moody's presence. Oh, sorry, Professor Moody. Fleur snapped back to reality. She recognized the man opposite Atticus as the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor. The Beauxbatons and Durmstrang students had been attending classes with the young wizards at Hogwarts this school year. She sincerely hoped Moody hadn't heard her earlier remarks, but after 2 months in his class, she knew that was unlikely. I didn't see you here. I'll wait outside the door. Fleur glared at Atticus Blaine, annoyed. He could have warned her, but instead, he sat there, seemingly amused by her predicament. You don't have to leave, Miss Delacour, Atticus called out to Fleur, who was about to make a hasty exit. Professor Moody and I were just... If you have anything important or need help with any problems, feel free to tell me directly, and I'll do my best to assist, Moody said, blinking as he lowered his gaze to his empty teacup. His actions clearly indicated that he wouldn't interfere with Fleur's conversation with Atticus Blaine. Nothing. Fleur began, but stopped herself. Despite her earlier complaints about the British Reserve, she hesitated to invite Atticus to the Yule Ball in front of another Hogwarts professor. However, just as she was about to speak, she fell silent. Having dealt with Atticus for some time, she knew his style well. Whenever she tried to express her feelings, he was as elusive as a slug covered in slime, always diverting the conversation away from the subject. Perhaps having another professor present would prevent Atticus from feigning confusion as he had before. All right. Fleur's thoughts crystallized into a decision. She adjusted her silver hair and lifted her chin slightly. The previous embarrassment and shyness vanished, replaced by a renewed confidence and charm that illuminated her delicate, angelic face. With brisk steps, she approached Atticus. The change in Fleur's demeanor did not escape Atticus's notice. As she approached, he frowned slightly, already guessing her intent. He had witnessed the Durmstrang warriors inviting Hermione to the Christmas Eve dance in the library, and hadn't expected to be caught up in a similar situation so soon. He had hoped that Fleur would voice her intentions in front of Professor Moody, thinking it might deter her, but her courage and determination surprised him. Perhaps he needed to be more explicit in his response. Before Fleur could even extend her invitation, Atticus had already made up his mind. Well, I came here to ask if you would like, Fleur began, casting a quick glance at Professor Moody. Even she could see that the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor, known for his sharpness and stern demeanor towards dark wizards, was holding his nearly empty teacup in a rather affected manner. Be my misguided dance partner at Christmas. Fleur finally declared, her invitation bold and assertive. This was truly unexpected. The renowned Atticus Blaine had an unexplained connection with Durmstrang's warriors. If word got out, what would people say? Moody's scarred face took on a subtle expression, and his magical eye fixed on the calm Professor Blaine through the bottom of the cup, eager to see his reaction. "I don't want to, Miss Delacour," Atticus replied. Cough! Moody choked on his tea, coughing heavily. He hadn't anticipated that Blaine would refuse so bluntly, without a moment's hesitation. Silence descended, and Atticus looked at Fleur with an impassive expression, as if she had said all she needed to. Fleur was indeed taken aback. She had anticipated many possible reactions from Blaine upon hearing her invitation. She thought that if he refused, he would do so tactfully, as he had in the past, or deflect the topic with a joke. She never expected Blaine to decline so directly and mercilessly. Why? Fleur's breathing quickened, her cheeks flushed with a mix of shame and anger. Why? Atticus echoed, raising an eyebrow. Because, according to tradition, although Hogwarts organized this dance to foster mutual understanding, I personally have no interest in this activity. Understand, Miss Delacour, I have no intention of being anyone's dance partner or accepting any invitations. Who will be my dance partner? Out of politeness and etiquette, I might dance with someone at the ball for a few dances, but that's all. But, Fleur's pure blue eyes flashed with anger. If you never intended to, then why did you have that little boy give me the dress? Atticus Blaine gave Fleur a ball gown? Professor Moody, who had been gazing out the window as if nothing had happened, suddenly felt his magical blue eye twitch, tempted to focus on Atticus Blaine. Fortunately, he managed to restrain the impulse. Yet, curiously, a mix of emotions stirred within him. What did you say, Miss Delacour? Atticus frowned, a hint of impatience in his voice. Didn't Harry tell you that the dress was a gift from him to apologize for breaking your nose? I merely offered him some advice, that's all. End of this chapter. Chapter 672. Don't Let the Hero Cry. After the livid-faced Fleur slammed the door and left, the atmosphere in the office grew heavy. Atticus Blaine remained expressionless, though a hint of apology lingered in his heart. He had just driven Fleur away in a manner that bordered on mockery. To be honest, he knew that treating a young witch who held great affection for him in such a way was excessive. Yet, he believed it was ultimately for her own good. After all, short-term pain was preferable to prolonged suffering. Alastor Moody, unlike the enraged Fleur, remained silent. As an outsider, he had observed Atticus's intentions with a discerning eye. Watching Atticus, whose expression was slightly vacant, Moody's eyes flickered with rapid contemplation. After a moment of hesitation, he spoke in a low voice. Was that really necessary, Blaine? Professor Moody's face tightened slightly as he caught Blaine's attention. She's just a young witch, infatuated with love, much like those girls who give you chocolates. At her age, it's normal to be drawn to handsome and powerful figures. Frankly, it would be odd for any young witch not to be enamored with a wizard like you. Atticus shook his head slightly. Fleur was different from the other young witches. He sensed that her feelings for him were more intense and genuine, not merely the admiration typical of adolescent girls for attractive and powerful individuals. Let's change the subject, Atticus sighed. Though he was reluctant to admit it, he had always avoided personal emotions. This was partly due to the deep loneliness stemming from his status as a time traveler, and partly because, during his early vulnerable years in this world, he had failed to establish a friendly connection with it. Tell me about your situation, Professor Moody, Atticus said, suppressing his emotions. You seem to be facing some difficulty, and it appears urgent. Moody, with his tough demeanor, couldn't help but feel a twinge of sadness at these words. Oh, I almost forgot, he said gruffly, pulling a folded application form from his pocket. He unfolded it and slapped it down in front of Atticus. I came to you for this application form for a salary advance. If you have no objections, Blaine, I'd like you to sign it. Atticus glanced at the form, raising his eyebrows slightly in puzzlement. I see Minerva's signature is already on it. Professor Moody, according to protocol, you only need Principal Dumbledore's signature. After that, you can submit it to Minerva for record-keeping and receive the other half of your salary. It doesn't seem like you need my involvement. That's the problem, Blaine. Moody tapped the floor with his cane, visibly impatient. I don't want to bother Albus with such a trivial matter, but Minerva insisted that if the application lacks the principal's signature, you must sign it for the school board's records. The board is quite lenient. Back when I was in the ministry, if I decided to award bonuses, it wasn't up to Amelia or the Minister of Magic to interfere. Atticus nodded in understanding, but didn't immediately sign. Instead, he stared at the application form on the table, lost in thought. Gurgle, gurgle. Alastor uncorked the bottle he carried and took a couple of swigs. After exhaling contentedly, he waited patiently. What happened? Atticus asked, interlocking his fingers to support his chin. Atticus Blaine looked at Professor Moody, his gaze meeting the professor's mismatched blue eyes. Please don't misunderstand me, Professor Moody. I don't intend to intrude on your privacy, but since you're asking me to sign an application, I normally wouldn't. I believe I deserve to understand the reasons behind it. Of course, you have every right, Blaine, Professor Moody replied, placing the capped bottle back into his pocket. Perhaps he had drunk too quickly, as he coughed a few times before catching his breath. I've already explained this to Minerva, and I don't mind repeating it. With a firm pat on his wooden leg, Professor Moody continued, his voice tinged white, the anger. Some of my old comrades and friends, like me, have dedicated their lives to battling dark wizards and preventing crimes. They've served the Ministry of Magic for most of their lives, but look at how they're treated when they can no longer wield their wands. Their bodies are scarred and worn. Some need sleeping potions daily to quell the mental damage inflicted by dark magic. Others must spend time at St. Mungo's just to survive. Their meager pensions can't cover these expenses, and the ministry refuses to pay the extra costs. His voice rising with frustration, Professor Moody nearly shouted, Umbridge is the most unpleasant woman I've ever encountered, yet she controls the ministry's finances. I've written her countless letters about this issue, but received no response. I suspect she tosses them into the fireplace. What about my poor old friends? Some have no family left because of their fight against dark wizards. I must help them. Atticus listened intently, his expression thoughtful. Professor Moody continued, Aside from buying wine, most of my pension goes to helping them. Honestly, it's just a drop in the bucket. I don't want to admit that part of the reason I accepted Albus's offer to teach is because of this, but it's the truth. Atticus whispered, I see, nodding slightly. Outside, the sun shone brightly, while the howling north wind swept up the snow from the ground and rooftops, creating a misty white landscape. After hearing Moody's words, Atticus fell silent. He neither refused nor agreed, simply staring at the application form on the table, his purple eyes occasionally glinting with light. As time passed, Moody's unease grew. He wasn't sure if Atticus had discerned something. After all, it was possible that Atticus had already. Okay, that's no problem, Atticus finally said, breaking the silence. The tension that had enveloped the room dissipated, and Moody, relieved, exhaled deeply. Atticus quickly signed his name on the paper and handed the application form back to Professor Moody. Thank you, Blaine, from all those old guys. Professor Moody sighed with relief, taking the application form as he prepared to leave. Wait, Professor Moody. Atticus called out suddenly, causing Moody's heart to skip a beat. He instinctively tightened his grip on the application form and turned back, his face frozen in shock. Atticus produced an empty money bag, then opened his own, revealing a cascade of gleaming galleons. Under the bright sunlight, the coins shimmered with a dazzling golden light, accompanied by a sweet, tinkling sound. The gold galleons flowed into the new purse like a waterfall, capturing Moody's attention. Atticus Blaine's expression gradually twisted into one of apparent physical pain. Finally, after about 3,000 to 4,000 gold coins had fallen, he grabbed his money bag and tucked it back into his arms. Although he was mentally prepared, when Atticus Blaine handed over the new money bag on the table, the frozen shock on Moody's face remained unchanged. His eyes, whether the real one or the artificial one, were both fixed in place, as if malfunctioning. He didn't glance at the gold, but instead stared intently at Blaine's face. Take it, Professor Moody, Atticus said with a smile. It's nothing more than a token of my appreciation for your old friends. We can't let our heroes bleed and cry, can we, Professor Moody? End of this chapter. Chapter 673, A Generous Heart. Professor Moody opened his mouth, his eyes fixed on Atticus Blaine's calm expression. Despite his resolve, he couldn't refuse the offer, and his gaze fell to the bulging money bag. "No, I can't, Blaine." Moody took 2 steps back, his lips pursed, and the struggle in his eyes was evident. "This has nothing to do with you, Blaine. You can't do this. Gold should be in the hands of those who need it. For me, they are just beautiful collections. I can't even remember the last time I used my wallet," Atticus said, stepping forward to offer the money bag. "Take it. Consider it a donation to those honorable retired veterans. Honestly, I donated to St. Mungo's, but it seems the gold wasn't fully utilized. In this case, I might as well give the money directly to those who need it." Atticus noticed a glimmer of emotion in the depths of Moody's eyes, hidden beneath their blue disguise. Alastair Moody's expression shifted slightly, but his rough, scarred face couldn't convey subtle emotions. Any attempt would only make his face appear more ferocious and unappealing. Unable to bear it any longer, Atticus tossed the money bag into Professor Moody's arms. "I believe you have plenty to do, Professor Moody, so please close the door on your way out and don't waste my time." "Thank you," Atticus said, turning away. He pulled out a design drawing filled with intricate magic corridors and nodes from his drawer. It was the blueprint for the core functional module of the learning machine. Atticus was on the verge of mastering it, and once completed, Remus would soon be able to mass-produce the learning machine and begin large-scale distribution. The money bag in Moody's hand was heavy, despite the weight-reducing spell that was still active. Yet Vitia felt its weight was unbearable, and the torment in her heart peaked. The thought of leaving the money bag and fleeing from this man forever tormented her nerves. "You're a good man, Blaine. I think I understand why Albus admires you so much," Moody said in a hoarse, deep voice. Atticus, focused on his design, trembled slightly at the words. Without looking up, he replied in a low voice, "The last person who said that to me ended up staying in St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries for half a year. Professor Moody, do you wish to follow in his footsteps?" Moody's mouth twitched, but he remained silent. He pocketed the money bag and turned to leave. After a few steps, he paused and turned back. "I have a question, Blaine." "You're welcome, Professor Moody, but it doesn't matter," Atticus replied, still not looking up. "I've been curious for a while, Blaine," Professor Moody said slowly, emphasizing his words. "Can your surveillance camera be used underwater?" Atticus finally stopped his quill. He raised his head slowly, meeting Professor Moody's gaze. His expression was light, and his tone casual, as if discussing when the snow outside would finally stop falling. "What's the matter, Professor Moody?" "I was thinking, it would be great if it could be used underwater, wouldn't it?" Professor Moody returned Atticus's gaze calmly. His rough voice seemed to vanish, replaced by an ethereal tone. "Your surveillance camera shined." The first game had significantly enhanced the viewing experience for the audience. It would be wonderful if it could prove just as useful in the next 2 games. "You know what I mean, Atticus. The second game is underwater. If your surveillance camera isn't effective, the spectators will be left clueless by the lake." "Hey!" Atticus Blaine, who had been observing Moody, suddenly smiled and said, "I thought I did a good job of keeping the secret, Professor Moody, but I didn't expect you to already know everything about the next game." "You know." Despite Atticus's unintentional revelation, Professor Moody remained calm. "I've worked for the Ministry of Magic for most of my life, Atticus. Even though I'm retired now, I probably have more friends in the ministry than you do. I don't need to pry. They bring interesting news to my ears. Barty Sr. would be furious if he knew that department employees were leaking critical information." Atticus smiled again. He placed the quill back into the ink bottle and looked at Moody once more. Their eyes met in midair, and silence filled the room. "There's no need for." After a long pause, Atticus spoke softly. "Except for air, the presence of any medium greatly interferes with the transmission of the magic magnetic field. Underwater, the monitoring mirror I invented will be useless." "What?" Their eyes remained locked, and Professor Moody said, "It's such a shame. People will be so disappointed." "Who says otherwise?" Atticus replied. After another moment of silence, Moody nodded toward Atticus. "Thanks." Click. As the office door opened and closed, the cold wind seized the opportunity to enter. Atticus, his hair tousled by the breeze, slowly sat down, his gaze falling on the design drawings before him, his eyes as intense as a prison guard's. After a while, he turned his head to look out the window, placing a hand on his forehead and gently rubbing the frown between his eyebrows. A hint of melancholy shadowed his expression. The office remained silent for a long time, devoid of any sound. Although the warmth from the fireplace made the room feel as cozy as if one were sitting on a spoon, an inexplicable chill lingered. In the distance, a black speck appeared against the pale sky. Battling the strong winds high above, the speck's path was erratic, yet it persevered against the cold, striving to reach the castle. The owl spread its wings over the black lake, which was gradually freezing. As it flew over the children's heads, it emitted several high-pitched hoots. Clearly familiar with the castle, the owl crossed the grounds and headed toward a room on the 3rd floor, unnoticed. Bang, bang, bang. Though Atticus was gazing out the window, he was lost in thought until he heard a knocking sound. Realizing there was an owl outside trying to enter his office, Atticus raised his eyebrows, quickly stood up, and opened the window to let the owl in. The gray owl, likely frozen, hopped into the office without waiting for a greeting. After surveying the room, it scampered to the fireplace, spreading its wings to warm them by the flames. Atticus was amused by the owl, as playful as its owner. He chuckled, opened his water tank, and retrieved a few snacks to exchange for the envelope tightly clutched in the owl's beak. "Is Sirius okay?" he asked. The owl, focused on warming itself and pecking at the food, lazily hooted a few times. This tired-looking owl brought a slight smile to Atticus's face. Atticus Blaine gently stroked the owl's head before opening Sirius's letter, which he promptly set aside. Though the letter contained only a few lines, Atticus's expression grew serious. He stood by the fireplace, lost in thought for a considerable time, before finally nodding to the owl perched at his feet. "I'm heading out," he said. "Feel free to rest here for a while. I'll leave the window open for you. If you wish to leave, you can do so at any time." With that, Atticus gestured for the blueprints on the table to leap into the drawer. He quickly exited his office and, 20 minutes later, found himself standing at the door of Dumbledore's office. End of this chapter. Chapter 674, A New Horcrux? Atticus? Before Atticus Blaine could issue a command, the 2 grotesque stone gargoyles guarding the entrance to Dumbledore's office shifted aside with remarkable discernment, allowing the door to open. As Atticus entered, he found Dumbledore seated behind his desk, engrossed in a letter. The gravity of Dumbledore's expression suggested he was dealing with a particularly pressing matter. Upon noticing Atticus, Dumbledore set the letter aside, removed his half-moon spectacles, rubbed his brow, and then replaced them. Atticus's composed demeanor immediately signaled to Dumbledore that he too had encountered something requiring urgent attention. Fawkes, the phoenix perched on a golden branch, had appeared listless before Atticus's arrival. However, upon seeing him, Fawkes perked up, his ruby-like eyes gleaming with sudden excitement, as if anticipating something. As Atticus passed by, he smiled at Fawkes, understanding that the phoenix was likely eager for a change of scenery after spending too much time in the office. "Headmaster Dumbledore, I just received a letter from Sirius," Atticus announced, striding quickly to the desk. Without waiting for an invitation, he pulled out a chair and sat down. He got straight to the point. "You know I've been asking Sirius to keep an eye on Barty Crouch's movements." This revelation immediately captured Dumbledore's attention, his expression growing more serious as he listened intently. Yesterday morning, Barty Crouch requested an extended sick leave from the ministry. He claimed that an injury he sustained while inspecting the treetops in Hungary had not healed, causing him too much pain to concentrate on work. Consequently, he decided to rest at home for a while and declined Fudge's suggestion to recuperate at St. Mungo's. He delegated his daily responsibilities to Percy, instructing him to report anything significant via letter. "Audacity!" exclaimed Armando Dippet from his portrait among the gallery of former headmasters lining the walls. The other portraits began to murmur amongst themselves, aware of the underlying implications. "What do you make of this, Atticus?" Dumbledore's blue eyes gleamed with a sharp intensity. He was skeptical that Barty Crouch was genuinely too ill to work, yet he shared Atticus's suspicion. Voldemort would not allow Crouch to die without reason. "I'm not certain," Atticus admitted, shaking his head, "but I believe we can't simply let Crouch unchecked." "You must understand, Atticus," Dumbledore cautioned. "If Tom is indeed hiding in Barty's house, a rash intrusion could jeopardize our entire plan." Atticus raised an eyebrow, slightly taken aback by Dumbledore's decisiveness and willingness to take risks. Yet, he understood that Dumbledore was determined to see Voldemort's downfall, even if it meant sacrificing lives. This was evident in his handling of Alastor Moody's situation. Despite knowing his old friend was likely imprisoned in the imposter Moody's office, Dumbledore had refrained from attempting a rescue. If Voldemort is truly lurking in Crouch's home, sneaking in unnoticed would be impossible, Atticus conceded. However, perhaps there's no need for stealth. It was a shared understanding between him and Dumbledore that allowing Voldemort to return was part of their strategy. Yet, to manage the risks, they needed to closely monitor the situation's progression. Every move by Voldemort's followers had to be scrutinized, ensuring nothing escaped their watchful eyes. Apparent that he was deeply intrigued. His eyes twinkled with a mixture of curiosity and concern as he leaned forward, his fingers steepled under his chin. "Atticus," Dumbledore began, his voice a gentle murmur that filled the room, "this is indeed a significant revelation. If this black stone is part of a Horcrux, it could be crucial in our efforts to dismantle Voldemort's dark legacy." Atticus Blaine nodded, his expression a blend of determination and caution. "I believe it might be the Resurrection Stone, one of the Deathly Hallows. If Voldemort used it as a Horcrux, it would explain its elusive nature." Dumbledore's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of understanding passing through them. The Resurrection Stone, that would indeed be a cunning choice for a Horcrux. Its power and history make it a formidable artifact. The room seemed to hold its breath as the weight of their conversation settled in. The portraits of former headmasters and headmistresses, which lined the walls, remained silent, their painted eyes fixed on the unfolding dialogue. "Atticus," Dumbledore continued, his tone now more urgent, "if you have any leads on the location of this stone, we must act swiftly. The longer it remains in Voldemort's possession, the greater the danger." Atticus nodded, his resolve unwavering. "I have a few leads, but they are tenuous at best. I will need to tread carefully to avoid alerting Voldemort or his followers." Dumbledore rose from his chair, his presence commanding yet reassuring. "You have my full support, Atticus. Remember, you are not alone in this fight. We are all working towards the same goal." With a shared understanding, Atticus and Dumbledore exchanged a look of mutual respect and determination. The path ahead was fraught with peril, but together they would face whatever challenges lay in their way. As Atticus prepared to leave, Dumbledore's voice stopped him at the door. "And Atticus, take care. The road to defeating Voldemort is long and treacherous, but I have faith in your strength and wisdom." With a final nod, Atticus Blaine stepped out of the office, the weight of his mission heavy on his shoulders, but his spirit unyielding. The battle against darkness was far from over, but with allies like Dumbledore by his side, he knew they stood a fighting chance. The emotions swirling in the room were complex, a blend of surprise, nostalgia, longing, vigilance, and regret. Atticus Blaine could sense these turbulent feelings emanating from Dumbledore, though the headmaster quickly masked them. "How did you come to know about this, Atticus?" Dumbledore inquired softly, his voice steady yet curious. "I was conducting some research," Atticus replied, his gaze steady on Dumbledore. "In the process, I stumbled upon information that Salazar Slytherin once possessed this stone. It seems he intended to pass it down as a significant treasure." Atticus narrowed his eyes, scrutinizing Dumbledore's reaction. "However, I'm not entirely certain if it has ended up in Voldemort's possession. It appears you have encountered this stone before, haven't you, Headmaster Dumbledore?" End of this chapter. Chapter 675, Split Up. As a great magician proficient in occlumency and a man who has weathered countless storms in his life, Dumbledore has always maintained a calm and composed demeanor in front of others, including Atticus Blaine. Rarely have his emotions fluctuated as intensely as they did just now. Atticus immediately sensed that there might be a story between Dumbledore and this stone. Suppressing his inner turmoil, Dumbledore scrutinized Atticus, trying to discern his intentions. What could Atticus be investigating? After a brief moment of thought, Dumbledore realized that Atticus was likely probing into the Deathly Hallows, which seemed the only plausible explanation. As Atticus attempted to peer into his heart, the old Dumbledore's lips moved slightly, unsure of what to say. Should he warn Atticus and hope he turns back from his misguided path? Atticus's pursuit of the Deathly Hallows was clear. He had likely realized he was nearing a barrier, knowing there was no higher peak beyond it, only a bottomless cliff with no way forward. Did he hope to use the power of the sacred artifact to elevate himself to the heights of legendary wizards? Dumbledore understood well that Atticus Blaine was a wizard obsessed with power. However, unlike most historical power seekers, Atticus was not fixated on the dominion that power brings. His focus was solely on power itself, hoping to witness the limits of magic. Despite his ambitions, Atticus harbored love in his heart. He respected the individuality and humanity of others, never looking down on them, despite his exceptional magical talents and powers far surpassing ordinary wizards. To be honest, neither he nor Gellert, at Atticus's age, possessed his vision and mature mentality. Trust, this word suddenly surfaced in Dumbledore's mind. He looked into Atticus's eyes. The genuine pupils, slightly concealed by a trick, remained bright. Atticus calmly returned his gaze, showing no signs of growing ambition. "You're right," Dumbledore said, the tension around him dissipating as a smile returned to his aged face. "Salazar Slytherin did indeed fashion it into a ring." Atticus raised an eyebrow as Dumbledore drew his wand. Just as Atticus had done earlier, the wand's tip traced a circle in the air, forming a pattern from wisps of smoke. A youthful-looking hand appeared, its index finger adorned with a black gemstone ring set in heavy gold. The black gemstone was the same resurrection stone Atticus had seen in Helga Hufflepuff's memory. "This is," Atticus frowned, "Voldemort's hand. Did he wear this ring in front of you when he was at Hogwarts?" "Not at all," Dumbledore replied, shaking his head slightly. "Tom is not a fool, but you must admit he was exceptionally clever in most people's eyes. He wouldn't show this ring to me, Atticus, because he couldn't explain how a child from an orphanage acquired such a priceless ring." Before Atticus could question further, Dumbledore continued, "Years ago, while researching Tom's past, I discovered he obtained this ring from his uncle. It's a complicated story, Atticus, and now is not the time to delve into it. We both have matters to attend to. What trouble are you in?" Atticus nodded. Hey, acknowledging Dumbledore's explanation about the ring. He sensed Dumbledore was withholding something, but just as Dumbledore didn't pry into his investigation of the stone, Atticus refrained from pressing Dumbledore to reveal what he wished to keep hidden. This was an unspoken understanding between them. "It's also related to Tom's Horcrux," Dumbledore admitted, looking troubled. Atticus Blaine didn't need to flaunt his omnipotence. He frowned and sighed deeply. "That's right, Atticus. You must remember that together we destroyed Slytherin's locket, the one you retrieved from Sirius's old house. It was the third Horcrux of Tom's that we destroyed. We also knew that Hufflepuff's golden cup had been turned into a Horcrux, and it was almost certain that Tom had made a Horcrux ring. To be honest, this was beyond my expectations. Once I realized Tom had created more than one Horcrux, I prepared myself mentally to invest a lot of energy into this matter. Have you noticed, Atticus? This is already the 5th one." "So," Atticus understood, "are you worried about how many Horcruxes Voldemort has created?" "We've discussed this issue, Headmaster Dumbledore. There will probably be no more than 10. Do you think Voldemort's soul strength will not exceed yours?" "We must be careful and precise in this matter, Atticus," Dumbledore sighed. "This is undoubtedly a very difficult task. Voldemort won't go around telling others how many life-saving charms he intends to create for himself." "Do you have any ideas, Headmaster?" Atticus glanced at the letter in front of Dumbledore and asked. In this matter, Dumbledore was the driving force. "We can only find some clues from Tom's past," Dumbledore mused. "I believe an old friend of mine, Horace Slughorn, who was Severus's former head of Slytherin and one of Tom's favorite professors at Hogwarts, holds some key information. I've been corresponding with him since the destruction of the locket, but he refuses to talk to me about Tom. To be honest, it's not surprising. Most people who knew Tom don't want to talk about him anymore, but I think it's time to speak face to face with my old friend. You know, Atticus, we all know that in a few months, Tom will be back among us, and we must hurry to figure things out to minimize the sacrifice. Atticus nodded solemnly, and suddenly his eyelids trembled. Slughorn. He had an image of this person. Dirk Cresswell, the current head of the Goblin office at the Ministry of Magic, had once mentioned him. Dirk told him that Slughorn seemed to regret not becoming his dean. "Let's split up, Atticus," Dumbledore said, standing up from his chair. He hurriedly took his traveling cloak from the hanger and then turned to Atticus. "I hope we can both bring back good news." "Oh!" Dumbledore suddenly remembered something as he walked to Fawkes's side. He turned around and gave Atticus an apologetic smile. "If you have no objection, I hope Fawkes can come with me. It's not a bad thing, is it? Young people should move around more on their own feet." With a whoosh, Dumbledore and Fawkes disappeared in the firelights, leaving Atticus rolling his eyes. By the time Atticus returned to his office, the well-fed owl had already left. He quickly packed his luggage. Before heading out, he suddenly remembered something, hurried back to his desk, picked up his quill, and scribbled something on a piece of paper. With a snap of his fingers, a wisp of electric light flickered, causing the parchment to float and automatically fold into a delicate paper crane. The paper crane, which automatically copied itself into 3, flapped its wings and flew like a meteor through the gap in the window that the owl had squeezed open. Gryffindor Tower. As they walked out of the warm common room, Harry, Ron, and Hermione were having a heated discussion while quickly descending the stairs. A white light suddenly leaped up from the bottom of the stairs, hovered above them for a moment, and then swooped down. Hermione, quick-eyed and quick-handed, caught the paper crane. "What's going on, Hermione?" Harry and Ron asked, exchanging glances. "Is it Krumm's apology letter?" "Oh, it's not." Hermione turned over angrily. "It's Professor Blaine," she grumbled. "He's taken leave again." End of this chapter. Chapter 676. Ron's resolve to grow stronger. As Hermione had anticipated, when she relayed some of Krumm's accusations against Professor Blaine outside the library, both Harry and Ron were incensed. Much like Headmaster Dumbledore, Professor Atticus Blaine was a revered figure in the wizarding world and a proud emblem of Hogwarts. The mere suggestion that Professor Blaine might be an admirer of the notorious Gellert Grindelwald was enough to outrage any Hogwarts student. "Who does he think he is?" Harry exclaimed as they exited the cozy common room. "Professor Blaine has vanquished more dark wizards than Krumm has ever encountered." Harry's fervor was palpable, especially given his admiration for the international Quidditch superstar. Ron, equally passionate about Krumm, declared that he would toss the Krumm sports model he had purchased at the World Cup into the trash that very night. Hermione was secretly relieved she hadn't disclosed the full extent of Krumm's conversation with her. She couldn't predict how Harry and Ron might have reacted. But that aside, Hermione tucked the notice from Professor Blaine into her pocket, her expression thoughtful. "Krumm mentioned that the symbol was Grindelwald's mark. He's definitely talking nonsense. I bet there's more to it." Ron interjected immediately. Since reconciling with Harry and Hermione, Ron had been eager to support their opinions, striving to mend their friendship. Harry and Hermione appreciated Ron's efforts, and his dedication to their friendship warmed their hearts. They also took the opportunity to reflect on their own attitudes towards Ron. "I think you're right, Ron," Hermione agreed, a rare explicit endorsement of Ron's insight. "But the question is, what does it mean?" "Do you think that symbol," Harry began, glancing around to ensure they were alone before lowering his voice, "is connected to the memory we experienced in Ms. Hufflepuff's office, that dreadful door, and, the Hallows, Hermione?" "Before Krumm called me out, I was researching in the general books section, but I didn't see Professor Blaine. He must have been in the restricted section at that time." As they walked through the corridor, Hermione smoothed her unruly hair with her hand, her brown eyes glinting with curiosity. "If only I could." Harry understood Hermione's implication, a flicker of intrigue crossing his face. The experience in the secret chamber behind that ominous corridor was one of the most bizarre in his history of adventures. It was clear to him that a significant secret lay behind that illusion. As a normal young wizard, curiosity was inevitable. Moreover, Professor Blaine had only forbidden them from discussing the matter with others, not from investigating it themselves. "Let's wait and see," Ron suggested, surprising both Harry and Hermione. Despite their astonished looks, Ron maintained a determined expression. "Don't forget, Harry and Hermione, because of this, we have to clean the PE classroom until Christmas. I'm tired of Malfoy's smug look every time your class ends. At least, until this punishment is over, can we hold off on any action?" Ron's suggestion was undeniably sensible. After traversing a few familiar paths, the trio arrived at the physical education classroom. Of course, their weekend visit wasn't solely for cleaning. As Ron faced the classroom door, a hint of melancholy crossed his face. Ron's fingers were white from the cold. He had been in this classroom twice before. The first time was in second grade, when Professor Atticus Blaine was still teaching Defense Against the Dark Arts. He had transformed the room into a daunting maze, filled with two of the most terrifying dark creatures the young wizards had ever faced. Only Harry had managed to overcome the challenge of the two inferi. The second time was in third grade, when Professor Blaine substituted for Professor Lupin. He turned the classroom into an open swamp where students from all four houses competed in a boat race. Looking back, these two classes were the most engaging of all their I call education. Due to Professor Blaine's disciplinary actions, Ron had become quite familiar with this classroom. While Harry and the others attended class inside, Ron would wait outside, quietly reflecting on his mistakes. He felt he deserved the punishment. After all, Professor Blaine had given everyone a fair chance. Fortunately, Professor Blaine was kind enough to guide him, even if he refused to accept him back into the class. Harry and Hermione stood behind Ron, encouraging him to open the door to the physical education classroom. They understood the significance this moment held for him. Despite its vastness and lack of a fireplace, the classroom was warm, impervious to the castle's external chill. Though familiar with the room, Ron hesitated at the entrance, his expression a mix of emotions. Sunlight streamed through the windows, brightening the room, so the torches on the walls remained unlit. However, the armors lining the walls clanged softly, their metallic echoes adding an ethereal and mysterious ambiance to the spacious room. Finally, Ron stepped inside, moving slowly to the starting line. Professor Blaine had marked for practicing evasive maneuvers against the large dung eggs. He stared blankly at the far end of the classroom. Harry and Hermione remained silent, giving Ron the space he needed to process his feelings. After a long pause, Ron turned to them, a hint of uncertainty on his freckled face. "Do you think I was a bit too eager for quick success? I mean, you both practiced running for a month before tackling the dung eggs, and I only did it for half a month." "There's nothing wrong with that, Ron," Harry reassured him, a touch of urgency in his voice. "You've been training more intensely than we did back then, so I think you're ready for the second phase of training. Physical training is crucial and needs to be sustained over time, Ron," Hermione added, her tone instructional, reminiscent of Professor McGonagall. "But the second phase of avoidance training focuses more on reaction and agility, not just physical strength. These two trainings can be done simultaneously. Professor Blaine had us run for a month not only to build endurance, but also to screen us." Hermione paused, realizing that Professor Blaine's intention was to identify students who lacked the determination and resilience to persevere. At that moment, Ron decided to abandon his stubbornness. He pursed his lips and fell into a brief silence. If it were possible, he would have applied for a time-turner from the Ministry of Magic, just to give himself a good punch for his earlier hesitation. "Ron," Harry began, but Ron's prolonged silence made him uneasy. Hermione and Ron were his closest friends, and over the years, he had come to rely on them, even if he didn't always acknowledge it. Their friendship had brought unexpected joys. Being with Ron was always entertaining, while Hermione's friendship, though less spontaneous, often led to long hours in the library. Despite this, Harry was thrilled that Ron had finally resolved to join the duel training. He feared Ron might back out again, intimidated by the challenges ahead. "Then, let's get started," Harry urged, but his concerns were unfounded this time. Ron suddenly lifted his gaze, a bright smile spreading across his face as he looked at Harry and Hermione. "What are we waiting for?" he exclaimed enthusiastically. End of this chapter. Chapter 677, First Experience. Hermione was already adept at manipulating the pieces of armor. With a flick of her wand, the scattered armor pieces clattered forward, making throwing gestures. The chilling atmosphere in the oppressive scene immediately caused Ron's expression to change. "Wait!" Ron shouted, his face pale. He was breathing rapidly as he faced the armors preparing to attack, sweat already trickling down his forehead. "Do you have any experience? I mean, can you teach me some tips on avoiding armor attacks?" Harry and Hermione exchanged glances, momentarily unsure of how to respond to Ron's question. Harry frowned, pondering their destructive journey so far, trying to identify any patterns. After careful thought, he realized there were no specific tricks, just a focus on dodging. Over time, it had become easier. "You have to," Harry began, searching through his training memories. Under Ron's expectant gaze, he finally said, "Well, you can't just think about getting past the blockade. Ron, you have to be aware of the movements around you at all times, because the armor will attack from multiple directions." Ron continued to look at them expectantly, hoping for more valuable advice. "Your dodging must be precise, Ron," Hermione added after a brief pause, sharing some key points she had learned. "You have to stay calm at all times. This is crucial because only then will your movements be accurate. In other words, don't start dodging the moment the armor attacks. Wait until the projectile is close to you. Acting at the right moment will help you conserve energy and handle the next attack." Hermione's words were insightful. Ron frowned, trying to grasp her advice. "I don't understand," he admitted after a moment. "Saving energy makes sense, but why wait until the projectile is close before dodging? Wouldn't it be safer to move out of the way in advance? Professor Blaine designed these armors to mimic our opponents in duels as closely as possible. They can track our position at any time. Think about it, Ron," Hermione explained quickly. "In a duel, if you dodge too quickly, your path becomes predictable. Your opponent won't just stand still. They'll further restrict your space, exhaust your energy, and make you panic, leading to mistakes. So your dodging must also be deceptive." Hermione's explanation delved into advanced dueling knowledge, not typically covered in other magical education courses. Even Professor Blaine hadn't explicitly taught them this. He had let them discover it through practice. "Dodging needs to be deceptive?" Ron looked puzzled. He didn't underestimate the difficulty of Professor Blaine's training, but struggled to understand the nuances hidden in the seemingly simple exercise. "One-ski fight, Ron," Harry suddenly interjected, and Ron grasped the metaphor. In a duel, dodging might seem passive, but it can turn into an advantage. By dodging, you can lure your opponent into attacking. This strategy not only exchanges physical energy for the opponent's magical energy, but also applies psychological pressure if they can't land a hit. These are practical dueling skills and concepts. Magicians like Professor Blaine or Professor Dumbledore don't need to overthink when dueling with others. Their sheer power is enough to overwhelm opponents. However, for most magicians who lack such strength, the wisdom of wizards in the ultimate realm is invaluable. "Any more, Harry and Hermione?" Ron asked, his curiosity piqued in a way rarely seen outside of Quidditch. Unfortunately, Harry and Hermione had no further insights to offer. Many skills can only be truly mastered through painstaking trial and error. "Take off your robe, Ron," Hermione urged as Ron stood at the starting line once more. "Magic can clean up the mess, but it can't completely eliminate the smell." "Be prepared, Ron," Harry cautioned, swallowing nervously. Watching Ron train was more nerve-wracking than playing Quidditch himself. "The weight of the big dung egg isn't light." Ron grunted in acknowledgement, focusing intently on time, each task ahead. The castle's ubiquitous suits of armor suddenly seemed menacing. He recalled how the Gryffindor students returned to the common room each night, exhausted and lifeless after their initial training sessions. How would he fare? Ron had heard that Neville had shown remarkable talent during this training. He and the eccentric girl from Ravenclaw were the top performers in the class, even surpassing Harry, the genius seeker. This outcome surprised many, but it also validated Professor Blaine's keen insight. He must have recognized their potential long ago, which is why he chose them as teaching assistants for the course. Maybe I can surprise people too, Ron thought, trying to convince himself that the challenge wasn't so daunting. It's just like a Quidditch game, except with more bludgers. Hermione's clear, commanding voice cut through Ron's chaotic thoughts, bringing clarity to his mind. As he sprinted forward, the howling wind in his ears faded from his awareness. His focus was entirely on the armors poised to throw on either side. His heightened concentration and determination sharpened his observational skills. He noticed that as soon as he crossed the starting line, an armor 40 feet to his right made the first move. Stay calm and don't rush to dodge. Ron recalled Hermione's advice. He watched the armor's movements intently, seeing its raised arms swing forward. I can dodge it. Ron felt a surge of excitement. Although the armor's arm moved so swiftly it left afterimages, he could still track it. Stay calm and don't rush to dodge. Ron reminded himself again as he leaped into the air, his eyes alight with anticipation. He was eager to see the big dung egg's trajectory. Behind the starting line, Harry watched Ron, whose attention was entirely on the egg to his right, his body already shifting in that direction. Harry pursed his lips, a flicker of sympathy in his eyes. Whoosh! The moment the big dung egg left the armor's hand, Ron's expression of joy froze, replaced by horror. It was too fast. While he could track the armor's arm, he couldn't follow the egg's flight path. It appeared 10 feet in front of him almost instantly, and he had no idea how it had covered the 30 feet before that. Hermione's instructions were completely forgotten as Ron's instincts took over. At that moment, Atticus Blaine's body and mind were consumed by adrenaline. As soon as his feet touched the ground, he leaped to the left with all his might. He felt as if his potential had been fully unleashed. Yet, despite his efforts, the large projectile, a rotten egg, whizzed past the side of his face. But it didn't matter. He had dodged it, hadn't he? Just as Atticus was silently congratulating himself, he was startled to find his vision skewed and his body off balance. With a thud, he crashed heavily onto the hard floor. A sharp, unbearable pain surged through his calf, and the pungent smell of rotten egg and feces filled his nostrils. It was then that Atticus realized he had been hit. What happened? I thought I dodged it, didn't I? He wondered, clutching his leg in agony and confusion. I already told you, Atticus, Hermione said, raising her wand to halt the enchanted armor. Harry approached with a look of sympathy, bending down to address Atticus. You need to be aware of your surroundings, eyes and ears open at all times. End of this chapter. Chapter 678, Quietly Changing, With a violent retch, Ron collapsed heavily to the ground, utterly unable to rise. Harry glanced at his watch. Exactly 20 minutes had passed since Ron began his evasion training. Compared to the start, Ron looked far worse. His entire body was drenched in the foul juice of the dung bombs, and vomit dribbled from the corners of his mouth. The repulsive liquid clouded Ron's thoughts, and though he desperately wanted to dodge it, the pain coursing through his body nearly paralyzed him. As he lay on the ground, all he could do was twitch as if in a spasm. Harry and Hermione exchanged glances, their eyes filled with more than just sympathy. Ron's pitiful state reminded them of their own early training days. It was time to call it a day. Harry and Hermione silently agreed. They approached Ron, and Hermione drew her wand, pointing it at Ron, who lay bruised, swollen, and drenched in sweat. Scourgify! She incanted. Instantly, it was as if an invisible eraser swept over Ron, removing the grime from his body. However, the spell couldn't completely refresh him, and his clothes remained damp with sweat. Come on, Ron, Harry said gently, helping Ron to his feet. Ron was nearly fainting, so Harry crouched behind him, slipped his hands under Ron's arms, and supported him as they moved. Hermione used a summoning charm to bring over a chair from the neatly stacked pile against the classroom wall. How do you feel, Ron? Harry asked, holding Ron's shoulders to ensure he stayed seated rather than slumping to the floor. Concern etched on his face. Harry watched as Ron, barely conscious, mumbled incoherently. Drink some water. It'll help, Hermione suggested, pointing her wand at Ron's pale lips and conjuring a small stream of water. As the cool liquid trickled down his throat, Ron seemed to regain some awareness, opening his mouth to swallow. Ah! Ouch! Ron's breathing was labored, like an old bellows being worked too quickly. Each gasp sent ripples of pain through his muscles, sharpening his dulled nerves and contorting his face in agony. "How did I do?" After a couple of minutes, Ron managed to control his movements somewhat. He nodded to Harry, indicating he no longer needed support, and leaned back against the chair, his voice barely above a whisper. "Excellent," Harry praised. To be honest, if this had been the old Ron, he would have either given up immediately after encountering the dung bombs or complained incessantly after training. But now, his first concern was his performance, which pleasantly surprised both Harry and Hermione. "You impress me, Ron," Hermione said, brushing her hair away from her eyes and smiling warmly at him. Despite their praise, Ron didn't seem elated. He merely offered a weak smile and shook his head slightly. "This is insane. I can't believe how you two managed to endure it. With this kind of training, it's a miracle there haven't been any casualties in gym class," Ron remarked. "The key is," Harry replied with a wry smile, "Professor Blaine isn't exactly lenient. Once you enter the second stage of training, there's no backing out." Padma, Parvati's sister, even considered asking Professor Flitwick to intervene so they could skip gym class, but in the end, she abandoned the idea. "Oh," Hermione shrugged. In fact, Padma did go to see Professor Flitwick had been informed by Hermione that the intensity of the physical education class was overwhelming, making it difficult for her to focus on other subjects. In response, Professor Flitwick privately approached Atticus Blaine to discuss the matter. However, Professor Blaine firmly stated that he would not allow any young wizard who had reached the second stage of training to leave his course unless they were expelled from Hogwarts. Seeing Harry's astonished expression, Hermione added innocently, "Luna told me." It was no surprise that Ron's performance in the initial training session was less than stellar. Even Luna and Neville, who were considered quite talented, struggled during their rest attempts. Despite the challenging experience, Ron's determination not to quit immediately was commendable. Harry and Hermione, having been through similar training, knew how to handle the aftermath of such sessions. Though the injuries appeared severe, a simple application of a healing salve was usually sufficient. Hermione handed Harry some fresh food she had brought and stepped aside for a moment. Harry instructed Ron to lie down on the desk they used for dueling theory classes and applied the healing salve to Ron's back. Once Ron regained some mobility, he managed the rest himself. As the sun set in the west, the biting north wind carried away the day's warmth, and the Black Lake finally froze over in the frigid temperatures. The cold drove many young wizards indoors, seeking refuge in the castle. However, a few daring students ventured onto the frozen lake to skate, their bravery earning cheers from onlookers on the shore. The three friends watched the spectacle from a window until Filch arrived to usher the students back to safety. "I feel much better," Ron exclaimed, stretching his arms after resting for over half an hour. "All right, that's enough training for today," Harry said, checking his watch. "Dinner won't start for a while, so we have time to finish our running exercises and then head back to the dormitory for a hot shower." Hermione agreed with Harry's plan, but Ron glanced nervously at the armor that had caused him so much trouble. Despite his apprehension, there was a hint of excitement in his eyes, though he knew he couldn't become a master overnight. Ron retrieved his robe and cloak from the ground and began to dress. Suddenly, the door to the physical education classroom swung open, and three figures hurried inside to escape the cold. They quickly noticed Harry, Ron, and Hermione preparing to leave. The atmosphere in the room grew tense as both groups recognized each other. Ron paused mid-dress, while Harry and Hermione fixed their gaze on the newcomers. Draco Malfoy met Harry's eyes with a cool indifference, while Pansy Parkinson cast a disdainful glance at Hermione. In contrast, Astoria Greengrass maintained a calm demeanor, showing no hostility towards the three Gryffindors. Harry and Malfoy locked eyes, their minds racing. Although they encountered each other frequently in classes, such private confrontations had been rare since the start of the semester, when the Daily Prophet had mistakenly printed Mr. Weasley's name, prompting Malfoy to taunt Ron. The conflict had escalated to the point where it even involved Professor Atticus Blaine and Professor Moody. The two professors engaged in a confrontation that, while public, was far from thrilling. The reason it lacked excitement was that Professor Blaine, with a mere flick of his wand, cast a spell that left Professor Moody quite embarrassed. Since that incident, Malfoy seemed less eager to instigate conflicts, as he once did. It wasn't long before he began spending more time with Parkinson and Greengrass at school, along with Crabbe and Goyle. These changes all stemmed from Professor Blaine's physical education class, marking the beginning of the third phase of teaching. Draco easily noticed the vigilance and disdain in Harry's eyes. At Hogwarts, only Harry Potter would look at him with such intensity. This annoyed Draco, yet deep down, it also unsettled him. Despite this, Draco refrained from retaliating immediately. His gaze shifted from Harry, lingering on Hermione for just a moment before settling on Ron, the embarrassed scion of a pure-blood family. "What's wrong, Weasley?" Draco asked, a hint of mockery playing on his lips. "Have you started to change your mind? To practice dodging more, or are you just afraid of getting hit?" Draco taunted, his voice dripping with mockery. Ron clenched his fists, his face flushed with a mix of embarrassment and anger. He wanted to retort, to defend himself, but the words stuck in his throat. It was as if Draco had found a way to tap into his deepest insecurities, and it stung more than he cared to admit. "Leave him alone, Malfoy," Harry interjected, stepping closer to Ron. His voice was steady, but there was an edge to it that hinted at his growing frustration. "Ron doesn't need to prove anything to you." Draco's smirk widened, his eyes gleaming with a malicious delight. "Oh, but I think he does, Potter. After all, how else will he ever step out of your shadow?" Pansy Parkinson's laughter echoed through the corridor, a shrill sound that grated on everyone's nerves. "Maybe he should just stick to cleaning classrooms," she sneered, her eyes glinting with malice. Hermione, who had been watching the exchange with a mixture of anger and disbelief, finally spoke up. "At least Ron is trying to improve himself, unlike some people who rely on their family's name to get by." Draco's expression darkened, the smile slipping from his face. "Watch your mouth, Granger," he warned, his voice low and dangerous. "Or what?" Hermione challenged, her gaze unwavering. "You'll have Pansy do your dirty work for you?" Harry, sensing the tension escalating, placed a calming hand on Hermione's shoulder. "Let's not stoop to their level," he said quietly, though his eyes never left Draco's. Draco, sensing that he was losing control of the situation, attempted one last jab. "You know, Weasley, if you ever want to learn how to really duel, you could always ask Professor Blaine for some private lessons. I'm sure he'd be more than happy to help." Ron bristled at the suggestion, but before he could respond, Hermione spoke up again. "We don't need your advice, Malfoy. We have each other's backs, and that's more than you can say." With that, she turned on her heel, leading Harry and Ron away from the confrontation. As they walked down the corridor, Ron's anger slowly ebbed away, replaced by a sense of gratitude for his friend's unwavering support. "Thanks, guys," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "Anytime," Harry replied, clapping him on the back. "We're in this together, remember?" Hermione nodded, her expression softening. "Don't let Malfoy get to you, Ron. He's just trying to make himself feel better by putting others down." Ron managed a small smile, feeling a little lighter. "Yeah, I know. It's just, sometimes it's hard not to let it get to me." "We'll get through it," Harry assured him. "Together." As they continued down the corridor, the echoes of Draco's taunts faded into the background, leaving behind only the comforting presence of friendship. "Need some advice, Weasley?" Malfoy asked with feigned concern. Hermione once again intervened, stopping Harry and Ron from retorting. She was weary of their pointless exchanges. Her extensive duel training and the experience of facing a fire dragon in the competition had endowed Hermione with an imposing presence, her expression icy and resolute. Even Draco, confronted with Hermione's stern demeanor, squinted slightly. "Let's have a duel, Potter." Draco finally revealed his true intention, raising his chin defiantly at Harry. "Just like our sparring sessions with Professor Blaine. In team mode, let's see whose team is superior." Draco's proposal left even his own teammates momentarily stunned. Pansy drew her wand, but it was merely for show. She had no desire to be expelled from Professor Blaine's class. "Don't forget, Malfoy," Hermione began sternly, but Draco cut her off. "Professor Blaine isn't at Hogwarts. We just saw him leaving the school grounds. If we close the classroom door and keep others out, No one will know what we've done here. What do you say, Potter? A real duel with Malfoy? Harry's green eyes gleamed with interest. Since the start of physical education classes, they had B.N. training under Professor Blaine. However, facing such a formidable magician, known as the most powerful of their time, they had never managed to gain the upper hand. They were constantly under pressure, which was understandable, but it only fueled the students' desire to face normal opponents, hoping for a fair and exhilarating battle. Harry shared this sentiment, and if Malfoy was the opponent, it was a chance to teach him a lesson. Don't be swayed, Harry. Hermione, ever perceptive, noticed Harry's interest. She spoke urgently, then turned to Malfoy with a serious expression. Remember, Malfoy, I'm the teaching assistant for this course. I won't allow you to duel privately against Professor Blaine's orders, and I won't participate. Oh, all right, Malfoy replied, unsurprised by Hermione's reaction. He continued to focus on Harry, shrugging lightly and smirking. I always knew Gryffindors were all talk. I'll do it, Harry, who had been silent, suddenly declared. Don't agree, Harry, Hermione protested angrily. If Professor Blaine finds out, you know the consequences. Calm down, mate, Ron cautioned in a low voice. He desperately wanted Harry to give Malfoy a thrashing, but not at the cost of Harry and Hermione being expelled by Professor Blaine for breaking the rules. I know Malfoy, Harry said, his expression cold. This isn't a trap. He genuinely wants a fight, and that's exactly what I want. Despite his eagerness, Harry was mindful of the risks. He narrowed his eyes, glaring at the pleased Malfoy, and spoke slowly. We can duel, Malfoy, but I have a condition. What is it? Malfoy asked, his demeanor turning serious. The duel will be between the two of us, not as a team. Harry wasn't blinded by anger. Although he believed Malfoy genuinely wanted to compete, he wanted to ensure Hermione wouldn't be implicated if Professor Blaine found out. And we both swear on our respective houses that, regardless of the outcome, we won't tell anyone about this duel. If you agree, we'll proceed. Having learned from past mistakes, Harry had matured. He was eager to face Malfoy, but was equally determined not to face expulsion. End of this chapter. Chapter 680, Taking Action. Are you really going to compete with Malfoy, Harry? Hermione turned to Harry, her eyes stern and full of concern. I must remind you, Harry, don't take any chances. If Professor Blaine finds out about this, he will definitely expel all participants from his class. He always follows through on his promises. Hermione's voice was loud enough for the three Malfoys across the room to hear, and her warning seemed to have an effect. Standing behind Draco was a quiet little witch with blonde hair and blue eyes, Astoria Greengrass. She and her sister, Daphne, were both Slytherins at the academy. Unlike her sister's usual aggression, Astoria was more reserved. After following Draco into the classroom, she remained silent, observing the situation unfold. However, Hermione's words stirred the worry hidden in her heart. Would you like to reconsider this, Draco? Astoria whispered, standing on tiptoes to reach Draco's ear. If you, Potter, or anyone else gets seriously injured in the duel, Madame Pomfrey will definitely inform Professor Snape or Professor McGonagall. Even if you try to hide it, the matter will surely reach Professor Blaine. Draco's gray eyes flickered with hesitation, but when he noticed the challenge in Potter's cold gaze, his uncertainty turned to resolve. This has nothing to do with you, Astoria, Draco declared arrogantly. Just as you said, Potter, the duel will be between the two of us. I swear on the name of Slytherin House that no matter the outcome, Pansy and Astoria will keep it a secret. Malfoy's promises are worthless, Harry, don't be fooled, Ron interjected. If the outcome were decided by fists, Ron might have already acted, but he was aware of the physical education class rules and didn't want Harry expelled from a class many coveted but couldn't join. Your family has tarnished the honor of pureblood families, Weasley, Draco sneered. But that doesn't mean others of noble birth don't care. I swear on the name of Gryffindor. An inexplicable restlessness surged through Harry's veins. He was eager for what was to come, ignoring Ron and Hermione's protests. He drew his wand and pointed it vertically at the ceiling. I swear on the name of Gryffindor House that no matter how the duel unfolds, Ron, Hermione, and I will never reveal that it happened. Oh, don't even think about it, Harry, Hermione exclaimed fiercely, but Harry had already broken free from her grasp, striding confidently toward the center of the classroom, his back and steps resolute. Draco snorted softly, turning to Pansy and Astoria. After a moment's hesitation, he instructed Astoria, "Go stand guard outside the door. If anyone approaches this classroom, come in and let me know." Without waiting for a response, he tossed his robe into Pansy's arms and moved forward. With the situation at this point, there was nothing more to say. Harry and Draco stood in the center of the classroom, facing each other from about 60 or 70 feet apart, their eyes locked in concentration. "Do you think Harry can win, Hermione?" Ron asked. In their first and second years, Ron knew Harry and Malfoy's abilities, but now he was uncertain about the strength of the two who had been personally trained. Atticus Blaine had trained them well. To spare Ron's feelings, Harry and Hermione rarely flaunted their skills in front of him, yet Ron still picked up bits and pieces from Fred and George. "I can't quite tell, Ron," Hermione said, frowning as she watched the two adversaries face off. She recalled Draco's performance during their usual practice sessions. But Draco is no pushover. His team lasted the longest under Professor Blaine. The red setting sun slowly dipped below the horizon, casting its final glow. As darkness crept in, the torches lining the classroom walls ignited with a roar, their flames reflecting in Harry and Draco's eyes, as if torches burned within their pupils. The air was thick with both heat and tension. As they bowed and prepared to duel, a peculiar thought crossed their minds. Despite their past conflicts, this felt like the first time they were truly facing off. It was a duel of destiny. Like the suits of armor behind them, Harry and Draco remained frozen in their offensive stances, eyes locked on each other. "What's happening? Why are they standing still like statues?" Ron wondered, expecting the battle to erupt immediately. Yet neither Harry nor Draco moved, maintaining their statuesque postures. Apart from the sharp glint in their eyes, they didn't even blink. "Keep your voice down, Ron. The duel has already begun," Hermione whispered urgently. "They're searching for each other's weaknesses. You know, Professor Blaine said that while many believe in striking first, the first to strike is often the one caught off guard." Ron pursed his lips, resisting the urge to shout, "I don't know." At least now he understood that the confrontation between Harry and Malfoy had begun in an unusual manner. As the standoff continued, Harry and Draco realized the challenge they faced. Both were students of Professor Blaine, who had imparted the same knowledge to them. Gaining the upper hand was proving difficult. Harry's eyes flickered with frustration. He didn't want to admit it, but he couldn't find any flaw in Malfoy's vigilant stance. He suspected Malfoy faced the same challenge. But would they remain locked in this stalemate? Suddenly, the door to the classroom burst open. Everyone, except Harry and Draco, instinctively turned to look. It was Astoria Greengrass, who had been keeping watch outside on Draco's orders. "Longbottom is coming. He's heading this way down the corridor, and I made sure he didn't see me," she announced. Hermione's spirits lifted. She thought the duel might not happen, but unexpectedly, both Harry and Draco chose that moment to act. Harry was quicker. He raised his wand and fired a spell. A red bolt as thick as a thumb, crackling with energy, shot across the room, aimed at Draco's arm. Boom! Draco didn't retaliate. Instead, he sidestepped Harry's disarming spell and pointed his wand into the air before him. With a loud explosion, a thick black mist erupted, filling the room. It rapidly expanded, obscuring Draco from Harry's view and spreading in all directions, threatening to engulf the entire classroom. "Stop!" The sight before him left Harry momentarily stunned. In all his training, he had never witnessed Malfoy wield such magic. Yet in a split second, Harry grasped Malfoy's intent, to seal his vision. Standing still would be the most foolish choice. Harry hesitated for just a moment before darting sideways like an arrow, distancing himself from the encroaching black mist. He remained vigilant, anticipating any unexpected attacks from within the dark shroud. His instincts proved correct. His feint had indeed provoked Malfoy. From the thinning black fog, a shadow shot forth like cold lightning, piercing through the mist and lunging viciously toward where Harry had been standing. The black python, moving too swiftly to change direction mid-air, crashed heavily into the armor beneath the side wall. Enraged, it coiled its body tightly, then sprang back like a compressed spring, launching itself once more at Harry. Simultaneously, from the opposite side of the defensive line, another shadow emerged. Two black pythons were now attacking from different directions, one from above and the other from below. In an instant, Harry realized he couldn't outpace or outmaneuver Malfoy's serpents. He could employ the Iron Armor Curse to fend off the initial assault, but it wouldn't be enough to defeat the pythons. The spell could only block a direct attack, not eliminate the threat. If they encircled him, he would be at a disadvantage. Moreover, these pythons could move independently of Malfoy's control, albeit more slowly. Malfoy would undoubtedly strike again, while Harry was entangled with the serpents. Thank you for your support throughout 2023. Wishing you all good health and happiness in the new year. P.S. Updates will resume in January. Please remember to vote for the new year. End of this chapter.